Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 291, Build with your ninjutsu and power. Chapter 291, Build with your ninjutsu and power. Shizen stood behind Tsunade, her face as pale as paper. She wasn't one of their strongest fighters, but the oppressive pressure she endured was no less than anyone else's. Her legs felt weak, barely able to support her weight, yet she stubbornly held on, refusing to collapse. Ten stood next to Rock Lee, her lips pressed tightly together and her face equally pale. She had no weapons in her hands, but even if she did, she knew clearly that they would be entirely useless. In the face of this kind of overwhelming power, all weapons, all ninjutsu, and all tactics were utterly meaningless. Rock Lee was one of the few who showed no outward signs of fear. His willpower was more resilient than anyone else's. His body trembled and sweat beaded on his forehead, but his gaze remained resolute. He stared fixedly at Hinata, teeth gritted, using every ounce of his strength to stay standing. He refused to buckle. He refused to yield. Only a single thought echoed in his mind. Is this a realm that hard work simply cannot reach? If so, then what was the point of his youth, his hot blood, and his day and night training? His eyes grew slightly red. He just stood there, using his last remaining ounce of stubbornness to resist the despair-inducing force. The oppressive aura lasted for only a few breaths, yet it felt as long as a century. When Hinata finally retracted her aura, heavy pants echoed across the plaza. Some slumped to the ground, others braced their hands on their knees while gasping for air. Faces were pale, and bodies were drenched in cold sweat. No one spoke. A deathly silence hung over the entire plaza. Everyone looked at Hinata, the formerly gentle, soft-spoken eldest daughter of the Hyuga clan. She stood there, her long, purplish-black hair fluttering gently in the wind, a faint blue light shimmering within her pure white eyes. She looked just as gentle and quiet as she always had. But everyone from Konohagakure knew. She was no longer the Hinata they recognized. She was a powerhouse beyond their comprehension. Tsunade took a deep breath, finally finding her voice. It came out slightly hoarse, carrying an unconcealable sense of shock. Hinata. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. Question her. She had no right. Praise her. That felt entirely inadequate. Envy her. Tsunade didn't even know what she would be envying. In the end, she just offered a bitter smile, shook her head, and said nothing. Shikaku Nara furrowed his brow, remaining silent, but his mind was racing. A power greater than that of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. No, perhaps even more than that. His gaze fell upon Hinata, a sudden realization dawning on him. Hinata's transformation definitely had to do with the two leaders of Akatsuki. Just what kind of method could allow a mere Chunin to attain the power to bring everyone to their knees in such a short amount of time? Orochimaru was the only one who actually laughed. His hoarse, low chuckle sounded exceptionally jarring in the silent plaza. Magnificent, truly magnificent. He murmured, his golden snake-like eyes gleaming with a feverish light. Is this the answer I've been searching for? His gaze moved past Hinata, looking up at the sky fortress hovering high above. Just what exactly happened to you all? Hinata stood in the center of the plaza, her calm gaze sweeping over the crowd. She offered no words, no explanations, and no boasts. She just stood there, quietly watching everyone, exactly as she used to. But this time, no one dared to look her directly in the eyes. Everyone here was once a ninja, possessing strength and power far exceeding that of ordinary people. Now, Lord Alex has temporarily returned these powers to you. He hopes you will use them to build, rather than to destroy. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed clearly in everyone's ears. Please use your respective specialties to contribute to the construction of the holy city. The plaza remained quiet for a moment. Shikaku Nara was the first to step forward, a wry smile on his steady face. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be using ninjutsu to build houses. Isn't it quite interesting? Inoichi Yamanaka laughed. Using earth release to dig foundations, water release to supply the water, and fire release to bake bricks. It's a lot more fun than fighting a war. Chozo Akimichi patted his belly and let out a hearty laugh. You said it. I've always wanted to try using the multi-size technique to move materials. Tsunade took a deep breath, burying her complex emotions, her face turning expressionless as she stayed silent. Even with their power returned, she couldn't change the current situation. She could only take it one step at a time. Orochimaru licked his lips, an excited glint flashing in his golden eyes. Then, may I research the optimal ratios for building materials? Using ninjutsu for scientific research is quite a novel idea. The crowd broke into chatter, the atmosphere gradually warming up. The frustration and powerlessness of losing their abilities had been completely replaced by the joy of regaining it. Under Hinata's calm watch, everyone appeared highly motivated, itching to get to work immediately. Hinata watched the scene, a gentle smile lifting the corners of her lips. She turned to look at Shion, Ryuzetsu, Anoka, and Samui beside her, then at Mei Terumi, Ino, Mabui, and Kagaya. Finally, she looked toward Kamita. Let the construction of the holy city begin. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 292, Chapter 292, The Rain Orphan Cave from Childhood. Chapter 292, The Rain Orphan Cave from Childhood. The sky over the land of rain had never been this clear. The heavy, lead gray clouds had long since dispersed, replaced by an azure sky so deep it was almost transparent. Sunlight poured down without obstruction, brightly illuminating the land that had once been eternally shrouded in dreary rain. However, it had rained for far too many years. Even though it had only been clear for 2 days, the ground remained slick and wet, littered with puddles and potholes. The soil was soaked into a soft mud, a single step would sink ankle-deep into the muck, accompanied by a squelching sound. Alex and Konan walked side by side along the muddy path. Sunlight bathed Konan, making her pale purple dress seem to glow. Her light blue-purple hair fluttered gently in the breeze. The tips of her hair still carried remnants of morning dew, catching fractured light under the sun. Konan didn't use any of her abilities to keep herself clean while walking. Mud splattered against her dress and soaked her shoes and socks, but she paid it no mind. She didn't even look down. Her gaze was fixed on the distance, as if searching for something, or perhaps recalling a memory. Alex walked beside her, equally allowing the mud to stain his robes. He didn't speak, only occasionally turning his head to look at her with a gentle, quiet gaze. They walked together for hours. They crossed a muddy field, skirted a flooded depression, and climbed over a ridge scarred by rainwater erosion. Finally, the entrance to a cave appeared before them. The opening was small, half hidden by creeping vines and weeds. If one didn't look closely, they would never realize a shelter was hidden here. The rocks around the entrance had been polished smooth by time. More than 20 years ago, 3 children had gone in and out of here, day after day, year after year. Sunlight hit the entrance, turning the hanging vines a vibrant, dripping green. Konan stopped in her tracks. She just stood there in the mud, staring at the entrance of the Rain Orphan Cave, motionless. The sunlight cast her shadow long and thin over the damp ground. Alex didn't rush her, simply standing quietly behind her. After a long time, Konan spoke softly. "This is it." Her voice was so light it was almost carried away by the wind. "The first home Yahiko and I shared when we were kids." She stepped forward, brushed aside the vines, and ducked inside. Alex paused for a brief moment before following her in. The Rain Orphan Cave wasn't large, but it wasn't overly cramped either. The entrance was narrow, but it opened up inside, about the width of 2 or 3 rooms. The ceiling wasn't exceptionally high, but an adult could stand straight without bumping their head. Dark green moss grew on the walls. Streaks of seeping rainwater marked the walls. The floor was uneven rock, though a few spots had clearly been leveled by human hands, covered with long-rotted wooden planks. At the very back was a slightly raised rock formation, serving as a natural platform. Sunlight slanted in from the entrance, leaving the cave half in light, half in shadow. Fine dust drifted through the air, dancing lazily within the beams of light. Konan's eyes settled on that platform. There. She raised her hand, pointing to the rock. "That's where Yahiko and I slept. We didn't have blankets back then, so we just laid down some dry grass and huddled together for warmth." Her voice was calm, as if she were telling someone else's story. "The winters were freezing. So cold we couldn't sleep. Yahiko would just ramble on about anything and everything, stories of heroes he'd heard, his visions of the future. He said he was going to build a village so all the orphans would have a place to stay, food to eat, and would never have to cry again." The corners of Konan's mouth lifted slightly, as if she were smiling, yet also holding back the nostalgic sting of unshed tears. "I thought he was just saying silly things. In a world like ours, how could that be possible?" She gently shook her head. "But he really went and did it. It wasn't just talk." Alex stood behind her, listening in silence. Konan took a few more steps toward the other side of the cave. There were several deep gouges carved into the wall there, crooked and jagged, as if a child had painstakingly scraped them out with a stone. Yahiko carved these. Konan reached out, her fingers lightly tracing the grooves. He'd carve a tally mark every so often to track how long we'd lived here. When Nagato joined us, he had Nagato carve them too. Nagato didn't talk much back then, but every time he made a mark, he was so focused, carving it stroke by stroke like he was carrying out some sacred duty. Her fingertips lingered on the carvings for a long time. The three of us lived in this little cave for years. Alex walked up beside her, his gaze falling on the tally marks. Some were deep, some shallow, some straight, some crooked. But every single one was clearly visible, as if the ones who carved them had never forgotten this place. Times were incredibly hard back then, Konan continued, her tone still carrying that calm, detached quality. When we didn't have food, we'd catch fish in the river or dig for wild vegetables in the mountains. If we were lucky enough to catch a rabbit, it felt like an absolute feast. We had no clothes, so we stripped them off corpses, washed them, and wore them. Yahiko always said I dressed better than him, but it was all just the same ragged cloth. She paused. But back then, it didn't really feel all that bitter. Konan turned around, leaning her back against the cave wall, sweeping her gaze over the small space. The slanting sunlight illuminated her face, softening her profile with a warm glow. Every day, all we thought about was what to eat today, and where to find food tomorrow. There were no other worries or anxieties. Yahiko was always smiling, acting like he wouldn't be afraid even if the sky fell down. Nagato didn't talk much, but whenever I was sad, he'd just sit quietly beside me. He wouldn't say a word, he'd just be there for me. I thought back then that those days would last forever. A faint tremor finally entered Konan's voice. I thought the three of us would always be together. In this cave, by that river, in this land of endless rain. She didn't continue. The cave fell silent. Outside, the wind rustled through the wet grass, carrying the fresh scent of soil and wildflowers. Occasionally, a few birds flew past the entrance with crisp, bright chirps. Alex stepped in front of her. He didn't speak, he just reached out and gently took her hand. Konan looked down at their intertwined hands. Her fingers were slightly red, stained with moss scraped from the wall, but he didn't care in the slightest, only tightening his grip. Later, Yahiko said he wanted to change this country. Nagato said he'd follow Yahiko, so I said I'd follow them both. And just like that, we walked out of this cave and into that wider world. She looked up at Alex. You already know what happened after that. Alex nodded. He certainly knew. The boy who walked out of the cave founded Akatsuki, hoping to change the land of rain through peaceful means, only to ultimately die in a conspiracy. The quiet boy fell into extremism after the death of his best friend, styling himself as a god. And the once gentle, resilient girl, after losing everything, guarded their inherited will alone until she met him. Over the ocean outside Amigakure, fighting Obito Uchiha together. Rewriting the fate where she was meant to die. Alex. Konan spoke suddenly. If they could see the world as it is now, what do you think they would feel? Alex fell silent for a moment before answering. They would be very happy. Happy that you found someone you want to protect. Happy that you are no longer alone. His voice was calm and unwavering. Happy that the ninja world has finally achieved true peace. And happy that the sun has finally come out over the land of rain. Konan stared at him blankly, her eyes turning slightly red. She pressed a hand to her chest. Alex had been born right here. Their very first meeting had been a life-or-death battle against Obito Uchiha. In that fight, without Alex's help, she would have undoubtedly died at Obito's hands. Not only would she have had no chance of surviving, she hadn't even wanted to survive. With Yahiko and Nagato dead, it was Alex who gave her the hope and purpose to keep living. And now, all of it had been realized. Konan turned to look toward the entrance. It was bright and sunny out there, the sky a clear, brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the endless, dreary rain in her memories. Yeah, she said softly. The sun is finally out. She smiled. Once the holy city is built, I'm really looking forward to seeing the looks on Nagato and Yahiko's faces when they're resurrected and see this brand new world. Konan squeezed Alex's hand, turning toward the exit. Let's go. We're done looking here. On to the next place. Where to next? The town, Konan replied with a soft smile. The place where Yahiko and I first found Nagato. And the place we used to steal bread and food from all the time. She stepped out of the cave, standing back in the sunlight. The sun felt incredibly warm, drying the damp edges of her dress. She took a deep breath. The air smelled of mud, grass, and sunshine, completely devoid of the lingering, cold dampness of the rain. Alex walked out, standing beside her. He looked down at her mud-caked dress and shoes, then at his own equally ruined robes, and suddenly chuckled. Next time we come, wear older shoes. Konan tilted her head to look at him. You actually care about that? It's not that I care, Alex shook his head. I'm just afraid you'll slip. Konan stared at him for a few seconds before turning her head forward. I've run up and down this path countless times as a kid. I've never slipped once. That was then. It's the same now. Now that you possess the Kekai Mora, your strength is too great. It makes you even more prone to slipping. Hearing Alex's inexplicable tone and catching his meaningful expression, the tips of Conan's ears turned red. What are you even talking about? She muttered shyly. Unbelievable, he can make a dirty joke out of anything, even a literal muddy road. Alex just smiled, not arguing the point. He stepped forward, wrapping an arm around Conan's waist. They began walking toward the nearby town. The sunlight was perfect. Their silhouettes gradually faded into the distance along the muddy path. The two sets of footprints they left behind were deep and shallow, slightly crooked, but always side by side, never parting. The Rain Orphan Cave remained lying quietly behind them, its vines hanging low, the sun slanting across its entrance as if no one had ever been there. Only the rows of crooked, jagged tally marks on the wall continued their silent tale. Many years ago, 3 children had spent a profoundly difficult, yet incredibly simple period of their lives right here. And now, that child had finally returned, bringing the sun with her. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 293, Chapter 293, Streets of the Past. Chapter 293, Streets of the Past. After leaving the cave, the two followed a dried riverbed northward. The ground was still muddy, but as they traveled higher, the soil became firmer and the puddles fewer. In the sparse woods on the distant hills, the silhouette of a low-lying building peeked through the trees. First, a few dilapidated wooden shacks appeared, followed by a cluster of dirt-walled courtyards, until finally, a small town appeared at the edge of their vision. It wasn't a large town, but it had everything one might need. A single main street cut from north to south, lined with various shops. There was a grain store, a fabric shop, a blacksmith, a general goods stall, and a bakery steaming with fresh heat. People bustled up and down the street. While it couldn't be called prosperous, it was orderly and organized. Conan's pace slowed slightly. Standing at the town entrance, her gaze swept over the familiar rooftops, landing on an old tree at the end of the street. The tree was still there, taller and grander than she remembered, its dense canopy casting deep shade beneath the sunlight. "This is it," she said softly. Alex didn't reply, simply standing quietly beside her. The two walked into the town side by side. The street was full of people, peasant women carrying woven baskets, clerks hauling goods, children chasing each other, and the elderly leaning against their doors to soak in the sun. Their faces held a calm expression, neither fearful nor anxious, as if life had always passed like this, day by day, completely unchanging. And indeed, it essentially had. Before the Fourth Great Ninja War, ordinary people across the ninja world lived exactly like this. War was a matter for ninjas, for those high and mighty figures, completely unrelated to common folk like them. Their only concerns were today's harvest, tomorrow's business, and the daily grind of survival. Even now, after the world-shaking event of being hung on a tree, their lives hadn't changed much. Before recalling all the chakra in the ninja world and releasing the infinite Tsukuyomi, Konan had secretly purged the daimyo and nobles of the ninja world. Those leeches who bled the common people dry would never return. Meanwhile, the original administrators and samurai castes had their minds subtly controlled to continue carrying out their duties. However, they were far more just and equitable than before, completely devoid of corruption. The ordinary citizens knew nothing of the truth behind these changes. They only knew that the local officials had suddenly become much more diligent, no longer demanding bribes or oppressing the masses, and their efficiency had skyrocketed. Some said it was an act of God, others said new lords had taken over. None of them knew that unbreakable commands had been permanently planted in the minds of those officials. Every town and city across the ninja world was being managed this way temporarily. Full administrative control would only be established once the Nation of Dawn was formally founded. But none of that mattered to Konan today. Today, she only wanted to walk the paths she walked as a child, see the sights she saw back then, and remember those long-gone days that would never return. Alex walked beside her. Sensing her mood, he reached out and lightly tapped her shoulder. An invisible wave of genjutsu rippled outward. The two became like ghosts, walking right down the middle of the street. People bustled around them, but no one paid them any attention. It wasn't that they couldn't be seen, rather, if anyone did see them, their minds subconsciously ignored them, as if they were just a tree by the road or a rock in the corner, unworthy of a second glance. "Let's go," Alex said. "Take me to see the places you used to visit as a kid." Konan nodded and stepped forward. She walked slowly, her eyes darting between the shops on either side. Occasionally, she would stop in front of a storefront, stare blankly for a while, and then move on. "That clothing store," she suddenly spoke, pointing to a shop with a faded sign. Back then, Yahiko wanted to buy Nagato and me new clothes. He saved up money for ages, but it ended up getting stolen. He was so angry he couldn't eat for days. Alex followed her gaze. The shop was very old now, the wooden doors chipped and the writing on the sign blurry. The door was open, and the faint shapes of garments could be seen inside. They walked halfway down the street before stopping at a general store. Several wooden barrels sat out front, filled with soy sauce and miso, filling the air with a salty, savory aroma. This used to be a blacksmith shop, Konan noted. The blacksmith was a good man. Sometimes he'd give us scrap iron to sell. Yahiko said that when we got rich, he was going to forge the best sword for him. She paused. Later, the shop closed down. I don't know where the blacksmith went. Her voice was calm, but Alex caught the faint, lingering melancholy. Time flew, and things changed. The people who had once shown them kindness were long lost to the passage of time, their whereabouts unknown. They continued walking. Finally, Konan stopped outside a bakery. It was a small storefront. Several wooden racks sat out front, loaded with freshly baked bread that radiated a tantalizing, weedy aroma. Inside, a middle-aged man with a weathered face was hunched over, kneading dough. Fine sweat beaded on his forehead. His movements were practiced and smooth, clearly the work of a seasoned artisan with decades of experience. Konan stood before the shop, her eyes locked onto the golden brown loaves. She couldn't look away. Back then. She began softly, her voice thick with complex emotions. Just to get a single loaf of bread, Yahiko would distract the owner, while Nagato and I would grab them. She watched the baker kneading the dough, her eyes reflecting scenes from more than 20 years ago. She had been a scrawny little girl back then, starving, wandering the street with two equally scrawny boys. Yahiko was always grinning, brave and silver-tongued. With just a few words, he'd draw the owner's attention away. She and Nagato would seize the chance to snatch one or two loaves from the edges of the racks, sprint away, and hide in an alley where the three of them would split the food. One loaf. Split 3 ways. Each of them only got a few bites, but the sweet taste of that bread was enough to make them happy for the entire day. We didn't think stealing was wrong back then. Konan shook her head with a bittersweet smile. We only thought about surviving. As long as we could fill our stomachs, we'd do anything. Alex stood beside her, listening quietly. Later, Yahiko said we couldn't keep doing it, Konan continued. He said that once we had money, we absolutely had to come back and pay him. Nagato nodded, and so did I. She sighed softly. But then, we never came back. Before meeting Alex, she had stayed strictly within the village hidden in the rain. Yahiko died, and Nagato drowned himself in the dream Yahiko had entrusted to him, growing increasingly extreme. As for herself, swept up by overwhelming grief, she carried out her daily missions as an angel of Akatsuki. She never had the heart to return. Over 20 years. A full 2 decades. She had never returned. Those owed loaves of bread, those promises they had made, had simply been forgotten in the corners of time, buried under a thick layer of dust. Konan took a deep breath, pushing down the swirling emotions. She retrieved a thick stack of bills from her sleeve and placed them gently on the edge of the bakery's wooden rack, weighting them down with a small porcelain bowl. She took one last look at the owner still kneading his dough. Over 20 years had passed. The young baker from back then now had grained temples and a weathered face. But his hands were still skilled, and his bread still smelled incredible. He had guarded this tiny shop, surviving in the chaotic ninja world for over 20 years without dying in a war or at the hands of a ninja. That, in itself, was a kind of miracle. I guess this settles a childhood tab, Konan murmured to herself. She turned and walked away. Alex followed closely behind. The two walked past the bakery and continued down the street. Behind them, the bakery owner finally finished kneading his dough. He looked up, stretching his back. His gaze casually swept over the small porcelain bowl at the edge of the rack. He froze. Pinned under the bowl was a thick stack of banknotes. The denominations were large, more than enough to buy every single loaf of bread in his shop. The owner stood stunned for a long moment. He looked around wildly but couldn't spot a single suspicious person. The street was as busy as ever. This. He picked up the stack of bills, his fingers trembling slightly. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to pure ecstasy. It was free money. He glanced around furtively, quickly shoved the cash into his shirt, and pretended nothing had happened, immediately going back to kneading his dough. But he couldn't suppress the corners of his mouth from twitching upward. The unbridled excitement was obvious in his eyes. He had no idea that the little girl who had once stolen his bread was currently walking down the street, her silhouette slowly fading into the distance. Konan didn't look back. She merely tilted her head slightly toward Alex and said, "Let's go." Next stop. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 294, Chapter 294, Frog Hut. Chapter 294, Frog Hut. After leaving the town, the two followed a dried riverbed northward. The ground was still muddy, but as they traveled higher, the soil became firmer and the puddles fewer. In the sparse woods on the distant hills, the silhouette of a low-lying building peeked through the trees. Konan's gaze had been fixed in that direction the entire time. "That's the frog hut," she said. "The place where Jiraiya-sensei taught us ninjutsu." Alex followed her gaze. The building was small, resembling an abandoned shrine or a hunter's cabin. It stood isolated on the hill, surrounded only by wild grass and a few crooked trees. "We spent 3 happy years here with Jiraiya-sensei," Konan added softly, stepping forward. They passed through the sparse woods and arrived at the cabin. Up close, the hut looked even more dilapidated. The wooden walls had blackened with age, with many planks peeling or completely missing, exposing the inner framework. The thatched roof was pitifully thin, with gaps wide enough to see the sky. One door hung half open. One window was shattered, while the other was boarded up tightly. The clearing in front of the door was overgrown with weeds. Several flat rocks, worn smooth, lay scattered about, looking exactly like makeshift seats. Konan stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes sweeping over the desolate scene in silence. Alex remained quiet beside her. The wind rustled the tall grass. After a long time, Konan finally stepped into the clearing. She walked over to the rocks, crouched down, and reached out to touch the surface of one. It had been rubbed incredibly smooth, clearly showing signs of someone sitting on it for a long period of time. This was Yahiko's stone, Konan smiled. He was always fidgeting. He was always squirming around while trying to practice, so he ended up polishing it round. She reached out and touched the one next to it. This was Nagato's. He always sat perfectly straight, completely motionless. He could sit there for a whole day. Finally, she walked to the third rock and sat down gently. "This one was mine." Alex walked over and stood beside her. Looking down, he noticed the rock was slightly smaller than the other two, worn down but much flatter. Jiraiya-sensei would stand right here. Konan raised a hand, pointing to the center of the clearing. "He taught us ninjutsu, showed us how to refine chakra, and explained basic ninja theory. He seemed so lazy, always acting like a complete slacker, but he was incredibly serious when he taught." Her gaze lingered on the empty space, as if she could still see the silhouettes of 3 youths. Yahiko was always the most eager. Every time he learned a new jutsu, he'd shout in excitement and drag Nagato up to spar with him. Nagato was always quiet, but he learned the fastest. Almost everything Jiraiya taught, he could master on the first try. And her? She wasn't as outgoing as Yahiko, nor was she a genius like Nagato. But she worked hard, always practicing a technique many more times than the others. "We had nothing back then," Konan's voice was soft. "No home, no family, no money. We barely had enough to eat. But we had Jiraiya-sensei, we had each other, and we had a roof over our heads." She looked up at the rundown shack. "When it rained, we'd hide inside. The room was tiny, but with the 4 of us crammed together, it felt really warm. Jiraiya-sensei would tell us stories, tales from his travels across the ninja world, the powerful people he'd met, and the bizarre ninjutsu he'd seen. Yahiko was the most invested, he'd constantly interrupt to ask, and then. Nagato didn't say anything, but I could see his eyes shining. As for me," she trailed off. "I would just sit there hoping days like that would never end." Alex simply sat on the ground beside her, quietly listening. For this nostalgic journey, he only needed to be a good listener. Konan glanced at him, the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. "Later, when we finished our training, Jiraiya-sensei told us he had nothing left to teach. The day he left, Yahiko cried incredibly hard, and Nagato's eyes were red. I didn't cry. I just stood right here and watched him go." Konan stared at the spot where Jiraiya used to stand and sighed. "Who could have guessed that our next reunion would be a fight to the death?" She said it very calmly, but Alex could feel the crushing weight behind the words. What happened later followed the original story. Yahiko died. Nagato became pain. Konan became the angel. And during that battle in the village hidden in the rain, Jiraiya ultimately died at Nagato's hands. "Konan, you can do anything now. The tragedies of the past aren't impossible to change. If they could resurrect Nagato and Yahiko, they could naturally resurrect Jiraiya as well." Konan fell silent, understanding what Alex meant. During that battle with Jiraiya-sensei in the rain village, she had stood in the shadows, watching with her own eyes as he died, his body pierced by countless black receivers. Even though she had long since numbed her heart, tears had still silently streamed down her face. "Let's go," Konan suddenly stood up, dusting off her skirt. "Let's take a look inside." She pushed the half-open door and walked in. Alex followed. It was dark inside. The only illumination came from the few rays of sunlight slipping through the broken window and the cracks in the walls. The air smelled of mildew and rotting wood. The earthen floor yielded softly beneath their boots. In the corner sat a pile of decomposed straw, what was once their bed. In the opposite corner was a crude stove with a cracked pot resting on top. A thick layer of ash coated the bottom. Faint scratches and scribbles were visible on the walls. There were crude drawings of fire release and water release seals, along with a clumsily written character for ninja. Konan's eyes traced over every mark before finally landing on a wooden pillar near the stove. Carved into the pillar were 4 names. The letters were uneven and crooked, obviously a child's handiwork, but every stroke had been etched deeply, as if the carver was terrified time would wipe it away. Jiraiya-sensei beneath it were 3 smaller names. Yahiko Nagato Konan. Konan reached out, lightly brushing her fingers over the carvings. Her touch was incredibly gentle, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. We carved this while Jiraiya-sensei was outside fishing, she whispered. Yahiko said we needed to carve sensei's name here so that even after he left, we'd never forget him. Nagato agreed, and so did I. Alex stepped beside her, looking at the pillar. The wood was beginning to rot, and the carvings had blurred, but they were still legible. 20 years of time hadn't been enough to erase them completely. Konan stood before the pillar for a long time. Then, she turned and walked toward the door. Let's go. Her voice was calm, but Alex noticed the slight redness at the corners of her eyes. The two stepped out of the cabin, back into the sunlight. The wind rustled the grass, and birds chirped from the distant woods. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The sun gilded the withered thatch of the cabin's roof in gold. Konan looked back one last time. The little hut was still run down, still desolate, still standing all alone on the hill. But there was no longer any sadness in her eyes. Only a gentle, quiet nostalgia. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 295, Chapter 295, Home. Chapter 295, Home. For the next half-month, the two of them simply wandered across the land of rain. With no destination and no schedule, they simply wandered. Konan led Alex through city after city, town after town. Everywhere they went, she would stop, at a street corner, by a bridge, or in front of a certain shop, stand quietly for a moment, and share a few words about the past. She showed him the river where they used to fish. The water was still clear, though the riverbed felt much narrower than she remembered. The reeds on the banks grew taller than a person, rustling in the wind like hushed whispers. Standing by the water, Konan told him how she and Yahiko used to compete to see who could catch the most fish. Yahiko had lost, but refused to admit it, demanding a rematch. Nagato had just stood off to the side, watching them without a word, a faint smile on his face. She took him to the hills where they used to forage. The edible greens were long gone, replaced by a vibrant carpet of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Konan crouched down, picked an unknown little flower, and smelled it. She mentioned how they used to survive solely on those wild greens. Back then, they didn't care what tasted good or bad, a full stomach was the greatest happiness. She showed him the shrine where they used to wait out the rain. It was incredibly dilapidated now. The paint on the torii gate had entirely peeled off, and a corner of the main hall's roof had collapsed. But Konan said it was one of the places she had felt safest. When it rained, the 3 of them would huddle in the corner of the hall, listening to the downpour and waiting for the sky to clear. Yahiko would tell stories he'd overheard from the adults, some true, some exaggerated, but they were all wonderful to listen to. Everywhere they went, Konan lingered for a long time. Her expression was calm, but Alex could sense the turbulence beneath her serene surface. The memories that had been sealed away by time were being opened, little by little, like peeling apart the pages of an old, yellowed photo album, each one carrying the heavy scent of time. As she walked through these places, she was no longer the untouchable god who commanded the ninja world. She was simply a traveler returning home, walking the roads of her youth, looking at scenery that had fundamentally changed, and reminiscing about the days she could never get back. Alex stayed by her side the entire time. A quiet companion. A quiet listener. They walked like this for a long time. Across fields, over hills, and through endless towns. Finally, at dusk one evening, they arrived at an unnamed little town. It was so small it wouldn't even appear on a map. Just one main street, 2 rows of houses, an ancient well at the entrance, and an old locust tree beside it. The fading light of the setting sun bathed the cobblestone street in a warm, orange-red hue. Standing at the town entrance, Konan's gaze moved past the houses to an empty lot at the very end of the street. There lay a pile of ruins. No, calling it ruins wasn't quite accurate. It was little more than a mound of collapsed dirt walls, completely overgrown with weeds and vines. Its original shape was completely lost. If Konan hadn't been staring so intensely at it, Alex wouldn't have even realized a house used to stand there. This is it, Konan's voice was light, almost carried off by the evening breeze. She walked forward, following the main street. It was quiet. An occasional pedestrian walked by, but no one noticed them. Alex's genjutsu was still active, allowing them to drift through the town like ghosts. Konan walked slowly. Every step seemed to tread upon fragments of her memory. Her gaze swept over the houses. Some were new, some were old. Some looked exactly as she remembered, while others were entirely unrecognizable. But she didn't stop in front of any of them. Her eyes remained locked on the ruins at the end of the road. Finally, she arrived. Konan stopped and stood completely still. The setting sun cast her long shadow over the collapsed dirt walls, like an embrace 30 years late. Alex stood behind her, not stepping forward. He could feel that Konan's emotional state was fluctuating far more wildly than before. This place was the most special. The final stop on her journey of remembrance. Konan's home. Her original home, before the wandering began. She stood there for a long time. Then, she crouched down and brushed aside a clump of weeds, revealing a section of broken foundation. The foundation was made of stacked stones. Thick green moss carpeted the heavily weathered stones. But beneath the moss, faint traces of life could still be seen. I originally thought. Konan's voice was soft, as if murmuring to herself. I originally thought I had northwest memory of this place at all. Of my parents. Of this house. No impression whatsoever. Her fingers gently traced the stones. Because I was too young. What can someone remember from when they were only 2 years old? I thought I couldn't remember anything at all. A profound sadness surfaced on her face. But after awakening the Kekai Mora, those scenes buried in the deepest parts of my memory suddenly surged to the surface. A faint tremor entered her voice. I remember now. I remember what this house looked like. I remember the tree outside the door. I remember the sight of my mother's back as she cooked at the stove. I remember looking up at the sky when my father lifted me onto his shoulders. I remember all the things I thought I would never recall. She couldn't finish. Alex stood behind her, watching her shoulders tremble slightly, offering no words. The sun continued to set, dyeing the clouds a deep purple. The evening breeze rustled the weeds over the ruins, the soft shhhshhh sound almost like an answer to her words. This house wasn't big. Konan's voice finally regained some composure. It was tiny. But it was so warm. During the winter, my mother would light the stove, and my father would hold me in his arms. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was so incredibly warm. Her fingers rested on the stone foundation, lingering there. Then the war came. My father was drafted into the military and never returned. My mother tried to raise me alone, but she couldn't hold on. She left me at the gates of a temple, hoping someone would take me in. And then. She paused. And then, that was it. Alex finally stepped forward and crouched beside her. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. I don't know what happened to my mother after that, she continued. The monks at the temple chased me away, saying they couldn't afford to feed me. So I started wandering the streets. All alone. I was so young. Later I met Yahiko, and then Nagato, and then. She looked up at Alex. The final rays of the setting sun illuminated her face, giving her profile a soft, warm glow. A single tear shimmered at the corner of her eye, catching the light, but it never fell. I used to think I didn't have a past. Konan shook her head. No home, no parents, no childhood. Those things were stolen from me when I was so small that I couldn't even remember they existed. But I know now. They did exist. I had a home. I had parents. I had a brief, yet incredibly warm 2 years. She stood up, her gaze sweeping over the ruins once more. The ruins remained silent, the weeds swaying in the wind. But to Konan now, it was no longer just cold stone and dirt. It was her former home, the place where her life began, the very first mark she ever left upon this world. Alex took Konan's hand. Gently, his thumb brushed away the tear that finally spilled over. You now possess the power to change everything, he said softly. Whether it's your friends or your parents, you can bring them back. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 296, Chapter 296, The Pure Land. Konan raised her right hand, palm facing forward. Chapter 296, The Pure Land. Konan raised her right hand, palm facing forward. The power of her Kekai Mora gathered at her fingertips, emitting terrifying chakra fluctuations alongside violent spatial tremors. Then, with just a gentle swipe. Ryup. The air in front of her parted silently to both sides like a torn veil, revealing a deep, dark rift. A freezing, gloomy aura spilled out from within. It was a cold unlike any winter wind. It didn't seep in through the skin, but rose straight from the depths of the soul. It felt as though something ancient was slumbering on the other side of the tear, its very breaths making the entire space feel suffocatingly heavy. This was the legendary afterlife created by the Sage of Six Paths, the final resting place for the souls of all who had died in the ninja world. Alex stood by her side, his gaze falling into the rift. Let's go, Konan said, taking the first step. The two stepped into the unknown realm, one after the other. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world abruptly changed. The sky was a boundless grayish-white devoid of sun or stars, bathed only in an eternal, melancholic glimmer. Beneath their feet lay an endless tundra, the ice so thick its bottom couldn't be seen. The surface was smooth as a mirror, perfectly reflecting their blurred silhouettes. In the distance, a forest of icebergs stood tall. They came in all shapes and sizes, some sharp as swords, some round as hills, others rolling endlessly like frozen waves. Narrow ice valleys separated the mountains, and when the wind blew through them, it carried a low whimpering sound, like the muffled weeping of countless wandering souls. An ancient, rotting scent permeated the air. It was the stench of death. Alex looked around, a hint of interest flashing in his eyes. Whoa, it's pretty big. He expanded his senses to probe the boundaries of the space and slightly raised an eyebrow. It's no smaller than the moon in the ninja world. The Sage of Six Paths had forged the moon using planetary devastation, utilizing a gravitational core to attract countless boulders until the celestial body took shape in the night sky. Yet this pure land, whether in scale or structural complexity, was completely on par with the moon. Alex closed his eyes, extending his sensory perception in every direction. Beneath the tundra and within the icebergs, the aura of sealing jutsu was everywhere. The seals were layered and nested together, forming a massive, incredibly precise system. There were also traces of six paths and jutsu woven into the seals, guiding souls into this realm and preserving their forms to prevent them from dissipating into the world. The Sage of Six Paths. Alex muttered to himself. His mastery over sealing jutsu and senjutsu really isn't low. But that was the extent of it. His current strength far surpassed that of the Sage of Six Paths in both disciplines. Standing here was like an architect standing in a house built by someone else. Not only could he understand the purpose of every beam and pillar, but he could also spot the flaws, see where improvements could be made, and know exactly which parts would collapse first under the erosion of time. He opened his eyes. The Sage of Six Paths is dead. This world's administrator is gone. As time passes, the seals will gradually loosen, and the senjutsu will slowly dissipate. The Pure Land. He paused. Will sooner or later cease to exist. Konan listened quietly, saying nothing. Alex thought for a moment, then turned to her. How about you integrate the Pure Land into your core space? The core space was the alternate dimension Konan had opened after advancing to Kekai Mora. It possessed 5 different regions, each with its own unique properties. You have plenty of room in there anyway, Alex smiled. Fusing another dimension will increase the stability of that world. Plus, with the reinforcement of your power, the souls here can be preserved for much longer. Konan fell silent for a moment before nodding. All right, she said. I'll do it once we get out. Alex gave an affirmative hum, and the two continued moving forward. The icy surface stretched out beneath their feet, while the undulating icebergs on either side cast deep blue shadows. The occasional sound of ice fracturing echoed in the distance, sounding exceptionally crisp in this dead, silent world. Alex's gaze landed on one of the icebergs. Its side was densely packed with countless hexagonal cells, arranged as neatly as a honeycomb. Inside every single cell, a soul was sealed away. The soul's eyes were shut. Their semi-transparent bodies looked as if they had been carved from thin ice. They were frozen in various postures, some standing, some sitting, some curled into a ball, but all wore the same peaceful expression, completely oblivious to the outside world. Curious, Alex flew up to an iceberg and pressed close to one of the cells for a better look. The soul inside was a middle-aged man with a weathered face. He wore ancient armor, looking very much like a samurai from the Warring States period. His hands were crossed over his chest, gripping a rusted blade, and the intricate patterns on his robes were clearly visible. They're even wearing the clothes they had on before they died, Alex noted, a little surprised. Konan flew over as well, her gaze falling on the soul. The older the soul, the heavier the scent of decay, she said softly. Alex nodded and flew toward another iceberg. The souls in this one were even older, wearing clothing that looked like it belonged to the era of the Sage of Six Paths. Their facial features had already blurred, and cracks webbed across their bodies from head to toe, making them look like fragile porcelain on the verge of shattering. Alex swept his gaze over them, silently calculating in his mind. At 500 years, cracks begin to appear on the soul. He flew to an even older iceberg. The souls here were almost unrecognizable as human. The cracks were so dense they resembled a spiderweb ready to crumble at the slightest touch, though the faint outlines of their faces and the remnants of their clothing could still be vaguely distinguished. 984 years, Alex said, raising an eyebrow. The absolute limit is 984 years. He turned to look at Konan. It seems the maximum lifespan of a soul is only 1,000 years. Whether they were ordinary people or ninjas, a soul in the Pure Land could exist for 1,000 years at most. Once their time was up, the soul would shatter and completely dissipate into the universe, losing even the chance to enter reincarnation. However, after achieving Kekai Mora, a person's soul underwent a qualitative transformation, far surpassing these ordinary spirits. Alex had been continuously cultivating the mental secret technique he obtained from the Black Fragment. As a result, his soul strength had already surpassed Konan's. The two continued their journey. The tundra grew wider, and the icebergs became more densely packed. Countless souls were sealed within the honeycomb-like cells. There were the old and the young, men and women, ninjas and civilians. There were samurai from the Warring States period, elders from the era when the hidden villages were founded, and countless victims of war. Konan's footsteps suddenly slowed. Her gaze was fixed halfway up the slope of a particular iceberg. There, two cells were placed tightly next to each other. In one cell rested a red-haired young man. His features were handsome, and his closed eyes exuded a sense of gentleness and unwavering resolve. He wore a long black cloak embroidered with red clouds, the Akatsuki uniform. In the other cell rested an orange-haired young man. Nagato. Yahiko. Konan stood before the iceberg, gazing up at the two cells without saying a word. Alex stood behind her, waiting quietly. After a long while, Konan finally spoke. Yahiko. Nagato. Her voice was incredibly soft, as if she were afraid of disturbing their slumber. Wait just a little longer. She paused, her tone growing even gentler. You'll be resurrected soon. A brand new world is waiting for you. Within the iceberg, the souls of Yahiko and Nagato kept their eyes closed, showing no reaction. But Konan felt as though their souls had trembled ever so slightly, as if they had heard her words. She didn't say anything more. She simply turned and walked away. They pressed on, crossing tundra after tundra, bypassing iceberg after iceberg. Finally, Konan stopped again. Her eyes settled on a relatively small iceberg. Halfway up its side, two cells rested side by side. In the left cell was a young man. His facial features bore a striking resemblance to Konan's, carrying a gentle smile around his eyes. He wore plain cloth garments and had a short blade tucked into his waistband, looking like an ordinary samurai. In the right cell was a young woman. Her face was soft and beautiful, an exact mirror image of Konan. This was her mother, dressed in a plain kimono, her long hair cascading over her shoulders and a faint smile gracing her lips. These were the souls of Konan's parents. She stood frozen before the iceberg, staring up at the two cells. The wind blew across the tundra, fluttering her long hair and the hem of her skirt. Under the grayish-white sky, her silhouette looked exceptionally frail, as if she might be blown away by the wind at any moment. Father. Mother. She spoke softly, her voice carrying an indescribable complexity. These were titles she had never used. Before her memories as a toddler had been awakened, she didn't even remember having parents. She had always thought she was an orphan, wandering the streets for as long as she could remember, scavenging for food in alleys and seeking shelter from the wind and rain under eaves. But now, she knew. She did have a home. She had parents. She had experienced over 2 years of a warm, albeit terribly brief, life. Her father would lift her high above his head so she could see the vast sky. Her mother would hold her in her arms, telling her stories on cold winter nights to coax her to sleep. Those memories felt so distant, almost like they belonged to someone else's story. Yet they were undeniably real, every single frame piercingly clear. Konan took a deep breath, suppressing the tumultuous emotions churning in her chest. Konan. Alex stepped forward, standing by her side. What do you want to do? Are you going to resurrect them now? Support this fanfic by leaving reviews, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters, visit Chapter 297. Chapter 297. Parents. Konan remained silent, her gaze locked onto the souls of her father and mother. Chapter 297. Parents. Konan remained silent, her gaze locked onto the souls of her father and mother. Alex didn't rush her, he just stood by quietly. After a long while, Konan finally spoke. Yes, she said, her voice soft but resolute. My father and mother died tragic deaths when they were young. Their lives were stolen by the war, stolen by this chaotic world. They did nothing wrong, they were simply born in the wrong place at the wrong time. They deserved to restart their lives. She paused, a flicker of sorrow passing through her eyes. But I can't go back. The sorrow vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her expression smoothed into serenity, and the light in her eyes grew softer. Let another version of me continue that interrupted childhood. Let another me keep this family living happily together. She raised her right hand. At the center of her brow, a scarlet Rinne Sharingan slowly surfaced. A flash of red light erupted. The light enveloped the souls of her father and mother. It wasn't blinding, instead, it carried a gentle warmth, like the comforting rays of a spring sun. The moment the light touched them, their semi-transparent souls began to glow. The radiance grew brighter and brighter, until it painted the entire iceberg in a brilliant gold. The ice began to crack. The two cells that had been sealed for over 20 years finally opened. The souls of her parents drifted out of the iceberg, landing gently on the ground. As they descended, their bodies gradually solidified. The ethereal translucence was replaced by real flesh and blood, their blurred features sharpened, and a healthy flush returned to their pale skin. In a single second, two people who had been dead for over 20 years regained their physical bodies. They stood on the tundra with their eyes closed, breathing evenly, as if locked in a deep sleep. Her father wore his plain cloth garments with his short blade resting at his hip. Beside him, her mother wore her simple kimono, her long hair draped smoothly over her shoulders. Their faces were just as young as the day they died. Time had left absolutely no mark upon them. Looking at them, the corners of Konan's mouth lifted slightly, though something glistened in her eyes. "Let's leave this place first," she said softly, turning her head away. Alex nodded, saying nothing more. The Rinne Sharingan on Konan's forehead flashed once again. A gentle force wrapped around her parents' bodies, lifting them into the air to hover behind her. Together, they crossed through the rift that was still slowly closing, leaving the pure land behind and returning to the soil of the land of rain. The sun shone down on their faces, warm and comforting. Konan took a deep breath, expelling the gloomy chill of the pure land from her lungs. She turned around and looked at her father and mother. They still had their eyes closed, lying peacefully on the grass with steady breathing. Konan watched them for a moment, then raised her right hand. The Rinne Sharingan flashed faintly once more, and a soft orb of light appeared in her palm. It wasn't large, but it radiated a comforting warmth, like a hearth fire in the dead of winter or a brilliant beam of spring sunlight. The orb of light began to stretch and transform. First came the outline, then the finer details, and finally, the colors. When the light faded, an infant rested in her hands. It was a baby girl. Her blue hair was soft and fine, her little face round and fair, and her features as delicate as a porcelain doll. She kept her eyes shut tight, her tiny fists clenched, and the corners of her mouth curved up slightly, as if she were having the sweetest dream. It was Konan. Konan at 2 years old. Adult Konan looked down at the infant in her hands, a complex mix of emotions flashing through her eyes. There was sorrow, relief, tenderness, and an indescribable sense of melancholy, like a bittersweet farewell, yet also a reunion. "This is me at 2 years old," she said softly, as if explaining to Alex, or perhaps just to herself. Let her stay with father and mother. Let her make up for all the happiness that was lost. She raised her other hand, her fingertips glowing faintly. The light gently touched her parents' foreheads, sinking deep into their minds. She was adjusting their memories. She wasn't erasing or forcefully altering them, she was just gently, tenderly plucking the strings of their past. She removed the tragic events, leaving only the warmth. Every memory of the war, every memory of separation, every memory of loss, she gently swept them all away, like wiping dust off the pages of an old book. In their minds, the only thing that remained was the blissful life they shared with their 2-year-old daughter. The adorable, well-behaved little girl who would smile and call them father and mother. That was all. Konan withdrew her hand, her gaze lingering on her father, her mother, and the tiny version of herself. "With my current strength and the things I've experienced." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm no longer suited to live with them." Right now, she was essentially a god of the ninja world, while her parents were just ordinary people. Ordinary, kind-hearted people who had never hurt a single soul. If they knew what their daughter had become. If they had to face the high and mighty God, who looked down upon the masses. They wouldn't feel happy. They would feel awe, anxiety, and fear. They would walk on eggshells around her and speak to her with trembling reverence. That wouldn't be a family anymore. The warmth would be gone. "I don't want that." Konan shook her head. "I don't want them to look at me with those kinds of eyes." She looked down at the infant in her hands, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "So, the childhood version of me will take my place. She'll give them the love they missed out on. She'll stay by their side, and they'll live a prosperous, safe, and joyous life forever." She paused. "And I'll be able to feel those precious memories too." Konan carefully placed the baby beside her mother, letting the tiny infant snuggle into her mother's arm. As if guided by pure instinct, her mother's body shifted slightly, her arm curling protectively around the child. Konan stood up, her gaze resting on the three of them for a moment longer. "Let's go," she said. Alex nodded, and the two turned to leave. The sun cast their shadows long across the vibrant green grass, stretching further and further until they slowly vanished over the horizon. Konan never looked back. But she walked very slowly. Alex walked beside her without a word, only turning his head occasionally to check on her. They walked a long way, so far that the nameless little town had become nothing more than a blurry silhouette on the horizon. Suddenly, Konan stopped and turned around, looking back in that direction. Her gaze pierced through the vast distance, over the rolling hills and sprawling fields, finally landing on that exact patch of grass. There, her father and mother were waking up. Her mother stirred first. Her eyelids fluttered, her eyelashes catching the sunlight before slowly opening. Her soft eyes carried the groggy confusion of someone just waking up, but the moment she saw the infant in her arms, the confusion melted away like morning mist under the sun. It was immediately replaced by a natural, unhesitating flood of pure maternal tenderness. She looked down at the baby. Soft blue hair, a chubby little face, sleeping soundly. The tiny reflection mirrored in the mother's eyes caused her lips to curl into an uncontrollable, adoring smile. "Konan," she called softly, her voice raspy but dripping with affection. "Are you awake yet?" Her father woke up right after. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and looked over at the baby in his wife's arms. A massive grin split his face. "Is little Konan still sleeping?" He leaned in, reaching out to gently poke the baby's cheek. His tone carried that specific, clumsy joy unique to fathers. "This little rascal actually slept in longer than we did." Her mother rolled her eyes at him playfully. "She's still little. Of course she needs more sleep." Right. The father laughed, pulling his hand back. He stretched his arms wide, taking in his surroundings. The weather was perfect, the grass was vibrant, and the distant chimneys puffed lazy trails of smoke. The outline of the town looked peaceful and inviting in the morning light. "It's a beautiful day today," he said, perfectly content. His wife gave a soft hum, her attention entirely focused on the baby. The sound of her parents' voices seemed to stir little Konan. Her tiny brow furrowed, she let out a soft mumble, and then her big, bright eyes slowly fluttered open. Those clear, innocent eyes immediately locked onto her mother's face. The mother's heart melted completely. "You're awake," she coaxed, gently tapping the baby's nose. "Are you hungry? Let's go home and eat." Looking up at her, little Konan broke into a massive, gummy smile. Watching from the side, the father's eyes grew slightly red, but he laughed out loud. She smiled. Konan smiled. "She's known how to smile for a long time, you big oaf." The mother shot him an exasperated look, though her eyes were shining with happiness. The father scratched the back of his head with a sheepish chuckle. He stood up, dusted the grass off his clothes, and leaned down to wrap both his wife and daughter in a tight embrace. "Come on. Let's go home." The mother nodded and stood up, cradling Konan carefully. The family of three made their way down the path toward the town. Held securely in her mother's arms, little Konan gripped her mother's collar with one tiny hand and looked around at the world in awe, the blue sky, the white clouds, the wildflowers, the butterflies, and her father's broad back walking just ahead. Her eyes sparkled like stars. Her mother looked down at her and couldn't resist pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Konan. Mommy loves you." Little Konan couldn't understand the words, but she smiled anyway. The sunlight bathed the family of three, casting their connected shadows onto the stone-paved path. It looked like a warm, beautiful painting. Far away, Konan stood completely still on a hill, her gaze crossing the vast distance, taking in every single detail. Her expression was calm, but something glistened in her eyes. It wasn't sorrow. It was a warm, soft feeling, like being wrapped in pure sunlight. She watched her father take her mother's hand. She watched her mother hold the tiny version of herself. The family of three walked further and further away, their laughter drifting over on the breeze like distant wind chimes. She watched for a very, very long time. Then, she turned to face Alex. "Let's go," she said. This time, there was no heaviness in her voice. There was only a light, airy sense of total relief. Alex looked at her, the corners of his lips curving up. "All right." The two of them walked down the hill together, heading toward the horizon. Behind them, the sun was shining brightly. The silhouettes of the family of three melted into the morning light and the curling smoke of the town. That was their happiness. And now, she had hers. Support this fanfic by leaving reviews, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters, visit Chapter 298, Chapter 298, The Construction of the Holy City. While Alex and Konan were away, the vast, empty expanse where Amigakure once stood underwent a complete transformation. Tens of thousands of ninjas poured the powers they once used for slaughter, destruction, and taking lives entirely into construction. Earth release was no longer a tool for creating barriers and traps, it was a means to level foundations and raise towering walls. Water release was no longer a torrent meant to crush enemy lines, it was the lifeblood channeled into aqueducts to nourish greenery. Fire release was no longer a blazing inferno meant to burn everything to ash, it was the controlled hearth used to fire bricks and dry damp soil. The results were staggering. This was entirely separate from the millions of ordinary civilians hauling materials, erecting scaffolding, planting trees, and paving roads. The ninjas handled the impossible tasks, while the civilians managed the work that didn't require chakra but demanded patience and meticulous care. Working in perfect harmony, their combined efficiency far surpassed any standard construction method. The holy city of the Nation of Dawn was rising from the earth at an astonishing, visible rate. At this moment, Kamita stood at the highest point of the central district, looking down. He wore a dust-covered work uniform, a thick stack of blueprints piled at his feet, and a charcoal pencil in hand as he made final adjustments to the latest design. The morning sun bathed his profile in a golden hue. His honest, dependable face was etched with sheer focus, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "Uncle Kamita." Hinata's voice called out from behind him, her dark purple hair fluttering gently in the morning breeze, her pure white eyes reflecting the dawn sky. "Lady Hinata." Kamita quickly dropped his pencil and bowed respectfully. Hinata waved her hand, signaling him to dispense with the formalities, and stepped up beside him. Her gaze fell upon the blueprints. "The central district is almost finished, isn't it?" "Yes," Kamita nodded, turning to point down at the city. "Please, take a look, Lady Hinata." From their vantage point, the complete layout of the central district was clearly visible. It was a sight completely alien to any city the ninja world had ever known. Skyscrapers pierced the sky, though rather than being crammed tightly together, they were arranged in an organized, staggered pattern, leaving ample breathing room between them. Trees lined every single street, lush grass blanketed the rooftops, and creeping vines wound their way up the sides of the towering buildings. Greenery flowed from the ground straight up into the sky, weaving its way into the concrete and steel. The entire city looked as though it had organically sprouted from the heart of a forest, rather than being forcefully built over one. "This is the concept Lord Alex spoke of," Kamita said, his eyes practically shining with reverence. "The perfect integration of the city and nature, humanity, and the environment coexisting in harmony. I took the liberty of trying to recreate the world Lord Alex described as best as I could." Hinata swept her gaze across the architecture, an indescribable emotion welling up in her chest. This was the world Lord Alex wanted, not a cold jungle of steel, not an oppressive military fortress, but a place where people could actually live in peace. "You've done an excellent job," she said softly. Kamita's eyes immediately reddened. He didn't say a word, only bowed deeply. The completed sectors of the central district were already taking shape. The core was the administrative center, a moderately tall but profoundly majestic building carved from solid, massive stone. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns that blended the ancient weight of the ninja world with a sleek, futuristic aesthetic. This would be the nerve center of the holy city, the place where all decisions would be made and broadcast to the entire world. A massive plaza stretched out in front of the administrative center. The ground was paved with smooth, gray-blue stone slabs, and right in the middle sat an unfinished fountain. Eventually, a grand statue would be erected there, though Kamita still hadn't decided what it would be. That was a decision only Lord Alex and Lady Konan could make. Surrounding the plaza were the meticulously zoned commercial and residential districts. The commercial district was low-rise and elegant, each storefront boasting a distinct facade and sign. The residential district, however, was filled with high-rises, every single one remarkably equipped with working elevators. Kamita had engineered them using the ninja world's current technology after Alex casually explained the basic mechanics to him. While they weren't perfect yet, they were fully operational. There were also schools, hospitals, parks, libraries, training grounds. Countless hours of blood, sweat, and tears had been poured into every building, every street, and every tree. Hinata descended from the high ground and walked into the bustling city streets. She strolled down a freshly paved road. A few ninjas were using earth release to smooth out the sides of a building. With their hands pressed against the rough masonry and chakra flaring, the uneven stones flattened out instantly, as if smoothed over by an invisible, giant hand. Their efficiency put any master mason to shame. Nearby, a team of civilians carrying heavy timber spotted Hinata. They immediately stopped and bowed their heads respectfully. Hinata smiled and nodded in return before continuing on her way. Rounding a corner, she found Cheyenne crouching next to a flower bed. Cheyenne wore practical trousers and a short shirt, her hair casually pinned up with a wooden stick. Her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, and her hands were covered in dirt. She was completely focused, carefully patting soil around a fresh sapling with surprising tenderness. "What are those?" Hinata asked, crouching down beside her. Cheyenne looked up and smiled, revealing two shallow dimples. "Roses. I had someone bring them over from the land of demons. Back at the priestess shrine, the courtyard was full of them. Seeing them bloom always made me feel better." She lowered her head and went back to planting. "I want every corner of this city to have flowers." Hinata looked at Cheyenne's dirt-stained hands and her focused profile, and a smile crept onto her face. "I'll help you, then." She picked up a rose sapling and, mirroring Cheyenne's movements, gently nestled it into the soil. Two incredibly beautiful women, looking almost like twins, squatted by a flower bed, planting roses. The sunlight washed over them, warm and peaceful. Not too far away, Ryuzetsu and Anoka were managing the logistics of an active construction site. Ryuzetsu's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise clearly and authoritatively. Every time she called out a measurement or material count, a ninja would instantly confirm it. Her organizational skills were off the charts, a talent she had honed in Kusagaku's Zanbu, now perfectly utilized in urban development. Meanwhile, Anoka led a team of medical ninjas, constantly patrolling the various sites. Accidents were bound to happen during construction. They weren't severe injuries, mostly sprains, scrapes, or minor crushing injuries. Anoka and her squad would rush to the scene, apply immediate medical ninjutsu to heal the wounds, and send the workers right back to their posts. This heal on site, return to work system dramatically boosted the city's overall productivity. Lady Anoka, a beam fell on someone's foot over here. Coming. Anoka briskly walked over, her hands glowing with a soft green light. She placed her palms over the worker's swollen ankle. Within seconds, the swelling vanished. The worker rolled his ankle experimentally and beamed, the pain was completely gone. Thank you, Lady Anoka. Anoka shook her head with a warm smile. Be more careful. She turned and headed toward the next person who needed her. Over at the boundary between the central and outer districts, Samui stood with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze scanning the chaotic frontier of the city's expansion. This was the front line. Ninjas led the charge, casting earth release to aggressively flatten the wilderness and compact the soil. Right behind them marched columns of civilians hauling stone and timber to lay the foundational frameworks. Bringing up the rear were the artisan craftsmen, taking the raw, brutalist structures and polishing them into refined architecture. The entire process flowed flawlessly from one step to the next, like a massive, hyper-efficient assembly line. The drainage trench over there is misaligned. Redo it, Samui commanded flatly, pointing at a freshly paved aqueduct. The ninja overseeing the sector blinked, ran over to check, and immediately paled. Yes, ma'am. Redoing it right now. Samui said nothing more, offering only a curt nod. She didn't need to get her hands dirty. She just stood at the highest vantage point, identified the flaws, and ensured the massive machine kept running smoothly. It was a skill she had perfected back in Kimobukure. Mei Terumi, Ino, and Mabui had formed an impromptu logistics coordination committee. Mei was in charge of communicating with the former leadership of the major villages, reallocating manpower and resources. Ino handled rapid intelligence relay. While her mind-body switch technique couldn't be spammed on a massive scale, using it to transmit critical, time-sensitive updates was faster than any radio. Mabui managed the macro statistics. Her heavenly transfer jutsu could warp materials directly to where they were needed at light speed. It was a massive drain on her chakra, but deploying it at critical bottlenecks saved days of travel time. Kuratsuchi just sent word. The second shipment of stone from Iwagakure has departed. It should arrive by tomorrow, Ino reported, pulling her hand away from her temple. Mei nodded, marking the convoy's position on a massive map spread across the table. She turned to Mabui. Mabui, can the medical equipment for the central hospital be delivered today? Mabui checked the tablet in her hand and frowned slightly. It's going to be difficult. The transport convoy ran into some issues on the road. We might have to wait until tomorrow. Unacceptable. It has to be here today, Mei said firmly. The central hospital is already behind schedule. If we delay another day, the installation and calibration phases will all be pushed back. Mabui was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. Understood. I'll dispatch more personnel to assist them. Further out in the peripheral zone, tens of thousands of ninjas were operating simultaneously. Construction hadn't even begun here, massive tracts of wilderness were simply waiting to be leveled. The ninjas stood in perfectly ordered ranks, slamming their hands into the earth and casting earth release in unison. The ground violently surged, collapsed, and compacted. The jagged, uneven terrain was flattened into a sprawling plain before their very eyes. This wasn't construction, this was terraforming. Ninjas specializing in water manipulation followed closely behind, casting water release into the newly dug canals and foundations to aggressively extract and drain away excess moisture, ensuring the base was bone dry and rock solid. Fire release users came next, blasting the damp soil with intense heat so that the next phase of construction could begin immediately without having to wait for the sun to dry it. Every single step had a specific jutsu tailored for it. Every single jutsu was pushed to its absolute limit, not to kill, but to create. Some of the older veterans couldn't help but feel a deep, complicated ache in their chests as they wove their hand seals. They had spent decades honing their jutsu to kill, to fight, to protect their villages, to complete bloody missions. Never in their wildest dreams did they imagine a day where their power would be used for this. Not for destruction, but for building. Not to extinguish lives, but to nurture them. This feeling was actually far more satisfying than winning any war. The former Kage were no longer Kage, they were just ordinary builders. Tsunade stood on a ridge, looking out over the sprawling megaproject. With her arms crossed, she stared at the skyscrapers rising from the earth, a look of profound emotion flashing in her eyes. I never thought I'd live to see a sight like this, she said, her voice thick with complex feelings. Shikaku stood beside her. This is just the beginning. According to the blueprints, the holy city will eventually house tens of millions of people. It will be the absolute center of the ninja world. Tens of millions. Tsunade muttered, a sudden smile breaking across her face. If Naruto could see this, he'd definitely. She cut herself off abruptly. Naruto was dead. Many others they knew had perished in the recent war as well. This was no time to speak of fallen comrades. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 299, Chapter 299, Angel God. A few days later, the Central District entered its final finishing phase. The administrative center was complete, the plaza was paved, and the surrounding commercial and residential districts were fully established. Only one thing was missing, the fountain at the exact center of the plaza. Carved from pristine white marble, the fountain featured a three-tiered cascading base, topped with an empty pedestal waiting for its centerpiece. Kamita stood before the fountain, tightly gripping a scroll of blueprints. His brow was heavily furrowed as he clearly agonized over something. He had racked his brain for days, but simply couldn't finalize a design for the statue. Lady Hinata had mentioned a few days ago that she vaguely knew the answer, but Kamita didn't dare make the call on his own. The implications were too massive, this was something Lord Alex had to decide personally. Just then, a voice echoed in his mind. Kamita. Kamita jolted, nearly dropping to his knees. It was Lord Alex's voice, ringing directly in the depths of his consciousness, as clear as if he were standing right next to him. Lord Alex. He replied mentally, his tone bordering on religious fanaticism. For the statue in the center of the fountain, use Konan's. Kamita froze. Use. Lady Konan's statue. Yes. Alex's voice was calm and absolute. Make it massive. She must have 3 pairs of wings on her back, 6 wings in total. The more beautiful, the better. Konan is the angel god, Alex continued, an unquestionable majesty lacing his words. Not just in the holy city. From now on, identical statues and angel shrines will be built all across the ninja world. They will serve as the awakening grounds where those with talent will earn the right to cultivate chakra. Kamita's heart began to pound violently. He instinctively looked up, as if Alex were hovering right in front of him. Awakening grounds. Earning the right to cultivate chakra. This meant that from this day forward, if an ordinary person wanted to become a ninja, if they wanted the power to use chakra at all, it would no longer depend on their bloodline. It would no longer depend on village selection. They would have to enter an angel shrine, stand before the statue of the angel god, and undergo a trial. Only by earning her blessing would they be permitted to cultivate. This was an absolute, fundamental rewrite of the ninja world's entire world order. Kamita took a deep breath, forcing down the shock exploding in his chest, and responded with utmost solemnity, understood. I will pour everything I have into ensuring Lady Konan's statue is worthy of the title of angel god. The voice in his mind vanished. Kamita stood rooted to the spot. After a long while, he slowly raised his head, an unprecedented fire blazing in his eyes. He was going to sculpt a masterpiece unparalleled in human history. He was going to make sure the entire world witnessed the glory of the angel god. Kamita immediately assembled every artisan, craftsman, and earth release specialist on site. He held nothing back, relaying Alex's exact instructions word for word. When the news spread, the entire construction site erupted. The angel god. Lady Konan's statue. We're building angel shrines. Murmurs swept through the crowds, but not a single person voiced an objection. Over the past few months, everyone had completely accepted their new reality. The absolute rulers of this world were Alex and Konan. They had bestowed peace, they had bestowed order, and now, they were bestowing a faith. And Lady Konan was truly worthy of the title, Angel God. The image of her manifesting the terrifying, 1,000-meter-tall divine angelic avatar during the Fourth Great Ninja War, radiating absolute authority and blinding light, was burned eternally into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. If she wasn't a god, who was? The craftsmen threw themselves into the work. They quarried the purest white marble from the deep mountains and transported the colossal blocks to the plaza using earth release. From there, they precision-cut the rough outlines with high-pressure water release and used fire release to heat their chisels, carving out Konan's features inch by excruciating inch. Kamita personally took the lead. He was already a peak Kaga-level powerhouse, his hands were steady enough to sculpt the microscopic texture of a single strand of hair. He closed his eyes, bringing Konan's image to the forefront of his mind. Her light blue-purple hair. Her cold, yet merciful eyes. Her serene, utterly divine posture. But it had to be more than that. Lord Alex had explicitly commanded 3 pairs of wings. He had crowned Lady Konan as the angel god, and those 6 wings were the ultimate symbol of her divinity. He had to capture that exact feeling. This couldn't just be a cold block of stone, it had to be a statue with a soul, a statue that breathed. Kamita worked like a man possessed, refusing to sleep or rest for 3 full days and nights. His subordinates brought him food several times, but seeing his manic focus, they didn't dare interrupt, simply leaving the trays nearby and quietly retreating. On the dawn of the 4th day, as the first ray of sunlight hit the plaza, the statue was complete. It was a 100-meter-tall colossus. Konan stood atop the pedestal, her blue hair billowing behind her. Her face was perfectly serene, carrying a cold, yet profound compassion. Her eyes were slightly downcast, looking as if she were simultaneously looking down upon the entire world and tenderly watching over the mortals at her feet. Behind her back, 3 massive pairs of wings spread wide. The texture of the feathers was agonizingly detailed, each one carved so realistically that they looked ready to catch the wind and carry her straight into the heavens. The morning sun filtered through the gaps in her wings, casting a shifting, ethereal mosaic of light and shadow across the plaza. No one spoke. Even the most hardened, emotionally stunted ninjas were left breathless by the sheer, overwhelming beauty of the statue. "It's so beautiful," someone whispered into the silence. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried far across the quiet plaza. There was no flattery or sycophancy in the tone, only pure, visceral awe. Standing at the edge of the plaza, Hinata gazed up at the statue. The dawn light and the 6-winged angel were reflected in her pure white eyes. The corners of her lips curled up. This was the Lady Konan that Lord Alex saw. The angel god. An entity worthy of the entire ninja world's worship. Cheyenne stood beside her, hands clasped together, her eyes sparkling. "Lady Konan is so beautiful. Is the statue even prettier than she is?" "It's different," Hinata said softly. "The statue is beautiful, but Lady Konan herself is even more beautiful." Cheyenne tilted her head, thought about it for a second, and nodded. "That's true." Ryuzetsu, Anoka, and Samui arrived shortly after, all gazing up at the sculpture with quiet joy. It had truly managed to capture about 80% of Lady Konan's divine grace and perfection. Mei Terumi, Ino, and Mabui soon joined them. Ino's mouth hung open for a long time before she finally managed to speak. "This is just incredible." Mei crossed her arms, her gaze slowly traveling up the length of the statue before finally settling on Kamita. "You've worked hard, Kamita." Kamita rubbed his calloused hands together and offered an honest, goofy smile, though he couldn't quite hide the exhaustion practically radiating from his bones. "It's my duty. If Lord Alex gives an order, I'll put my life on the line to make sure it's perfect." Pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose, Mabui offered a succinct evaluation, flawless. Kamita's grin grew even wider, the exhaustion seeming to melt away. Word spread through the construction site like wildfire. People flooded into the plaza, desperate to see the legendary statue with their own eyes. The square was soon packed to the brim, but there was no shoving, no shouting. Everyone stood in perfect silence, staring up at the 6-winged angel. Some dropped to their knees, clasping their hands and closing their eyes in prayer. Some just stood quietly, an inexplicable light shining in their eyes. Some held up their children, pointing to the sky so they could see the true guardian of their world. Ninjas, civilians, the elderly, the young, they were all looking up at the exact same monument. It was a beauty unlike anything they had ever witnessed. It wasn't just ornate or technically impressive, it was a transcendent, soul-piercing divinity that existed entirely beyond the material realm. Some of the oldest civilians stared at the statue, suddenly bursting into tears. They couldn't articulate why they were crying. They just felt that after surviving a lifetime of brutal wars, after burying countless loved ones, to live long enough to see a sight like this, to actually survive to see the world change, it was all worth it. Kamita stood on the statue's pedestal, holding the final piece in his hands, a decorative plaque. Without asking for anyone's approval, he personally embedded it into the front of the pedestal. 3 words were carved into the stone. Angel God. Kamita took a few steps back, looked at the plaque, and nodded in profound satisfaction. He then turned around, facing the tens of thousands of people gathered in the plaza, and shouted at the top of his lungs. "Lord Alex has decreed. From this day forward, identical statues and angel shrines will be constructed in every corner of the ninja world. The angel shrines will serve as the awakening grounds where those with talent will earn the right to cultivate chakra." The plaza was dead silent for a split second. Then, it erupted into a deafening roar. It wasn't a cry of rebellion. It wasn't a shout of doubt. It was cheering. The people cheered wildly, screaming the name of the angel god, praising the grace of Lord Alex, and chanting, "Glory to the angel god." Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 300, no longer fearing future enemies. The central district of the holy city had entered its final polishing phase. The morning sun crested the horizon, its light filtering through the spread wings of the angel god statue, scattering a soft, mottled glow across the plaza and the surrounding streets. The fountain hadn't been officially activated yet, but the base was already lined with pristine white marble. An intricate network of aqueducts radiated outward from the plaza's edge, connecting to the sprawling, interlocking waterways of the central district. Further out, the silhouettes of towering skyscrapers, lush gardens, wide avenues, and suspended skybridges were slowly taking their final forms. This city was absolutely nothing like the hidden villages of old. There were no dark, claustrophobic alleyways, no eternal downpours blocking out the sky, and no broken masses whose backs had been bent by war and poverty. It was wide, bright, and impeccably clean. Trees lined the massive boulevards, sprawling green spaces separated the architecture, vines crept up the sides of houses, and rooftops had been transformed into miniature gardens. From a distance, the holy city looked as though it had organically grown out of the forest and the sunlight. And near the inner lake of the central district, a specific residential zone had been exclusively cordoned off. It lacked the imposing majesty of the administrative district and the bustling energy of the commercial district. This place was perfectly tranquil. The lake water was crystal clear, its shores paved with pale, smooth stones. Several exquisite manors were scattered gracefully along the waterfront and tucked away in the woods, each boasting its own distinct architectural style. This was the private residential sector chosen by the women at Alex's side. Hinata had chosen a quaint white cottage adjacent to a massive garden. Cheyenne loved houses with sweeping courtyards. She insisted she was going to fill them with flowers brought over from the land of demons. Ryuzetsu picked a location right next to the training ground so she could easily go on patrol. Anoka's house was just a short walk from the central hospital. Samui selected a high-altitude residence with a commanding, unobstructed view of the city. Mei Terumi instantly claimed a luxurious manor equipped with private hot springs. Ino wanted a place that was close to the streets but shielded from the noise, perfect for opening a flower shop in the future. Mabui, ever practical, chose the house with the most optimized interior layout, ensuring it doubled as an efficient home office. Everyone had their own preferences. Everyone was using their own unique methods to turn these blueprints into true, living homes. And the location Kagaya Otsutsuki chose was tucked away at the farthest edge of the lake. There sat a completely isolated manor. It wasn't the largest by any means, but it was undoubtedly the quietest. It backed up against a dense birch forest, with the pristine inner lake stretching out before it. A small wooden dock extended over the water, and at the very end of the pier sat a single reclining chair. When morning came, the sunrise would gleam across the lake's surface. When night fell, the moonlight would reflect perfectly on the rippling water. The very first time Kagaya walked past the area, she took one look and stopped in her tracks. Here. That was all she said. And so, it became her home. At this moment, Kagaya stood in the center of the manor's grand hall. She still wore her sweeping, oversized white robes. Her long, silvery white hair cascaded all the way down to her ankles. The Rinne Sharingan on her forehead was closed, leaving only a faint red slit between her brows. She stood there, as perfectly still and quiet as a statue of white jade. Yet, in her hands, she held a thick, heavy interior decoration catalog. Kamida had explicitly ordered someone to deliver it to her. Its pages were filled with illustrations of various furniture, chandeliers, curtains, rugs, folding screens, flower stands, and bookshelves, along with concepts Alex had casually mentioned, which Kamida had then integrated and brought to life. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 301, Kagaya and Hanabi. Sister Kagaya. A crisp voice rang out from outside the door. Kagaya slightly turned her head. Soon after, a small figure poked her head in from the doorway. It was Hanabi. Little Hanabi was wearing a light purple dress today, her short black hair swaying gently with her movements. Her pure, Byakugan eyes were bright and clear, her face carrying an unconcealed curiosity. She first looked at Kagaya, then glanced at the various fabrics and furniture samples piled up in the hall, her eyes instantly lighting up. Wow, so many things. Kagaya looked at her, her expression softening a fraction. You're here. Hanabi ran inside with practiced familiarity. Over the past few days, she and Kagaya had gotten along surprisingly well. In the beginning, Hanabi had actually been a little afraid of her. After all, the ancient and noble aura radiating from Kagaya was simply too intense. When she stood there in silence, it made people subconsciously hold their breath. But later, Hanabi realized that while this sister Kagaya looked cold, she wasn't scary at all. She just didn't know a lot of things. She didn't know how to use the newly built elevators in the holy city. She didn't know why people liked putting flowers on windowsills. She didn't know why ordinary people said, "Thanks for the meal," before eating. She didn't even know why children liked playing on swings. Hanabi found this fascinating. So, she began to teach Kagaya. She taught her how to sit on a swing. She taught her how to tell different desserts apart. She taught her how to pick out the most suitable color for curtains from a pile of swatches. Kagaya learned very earnestly. And just like that, the relationship between the two grew closer bit by bit. Hanabi ran up to Kagaya and stood on her tiptoes to look at the catalog in her hands. Sister Kagaya, have you decided how you want to decorate the room? Kagaya handed the catalog to her. I have selected a few things. Hanabi took it and flipped through the pages seriously. White gauze curtains, white carpets, a white bed, white vases. She looked up and blinked. Sister Kagaya, you really like white. Kagaya looked down at her own pristine white robes. I am used to it. But if everything is white, won't it feel too cold and empty? Hanabi tilted her head in thought, then pointed at a piece of light gold fabric in the catalog. We could add a little bit of this color here. Kagaya looked at where she was pointing. Light gold. Yeah. Hanabi nodded vigorously. When the sun shines in during the morning, it will look really pretty. Sister Kagaya's hair is white, and your clothes are white. If there is a little light gold in the room, it will feel very warm. Kagaya fell silent for a moment. Warm. She repeated the word softly. Hanabi didn't notice the subtle shift in her tone and flipped another page. And here, we can put some flowers. Flowers. That's right, Hanabi said. Big Sister said that having flowers in a room makes you feel happier. Sister Cheyenne also said that every corner of the city should have flowers. Kagaya thought about it. What should we plant? Hanabi instantly perked up. We could plant lilies of the valley. Or roses. But since Sister Kagaya's place is right by the inner lake, I think planting white lotuses would look beautiful. White lotuses. Yeah, flowers that bloom on the surface of the water. Hanabi gestured with her hands. Very clean, very pretty. Just like you, Sister Kagaya. Kagaya gazed out the window at the lake. The water was tranquil, perfectly reflecting the sky. If that surface were covered in blooming white lotuses, it would indeed be a beautiful sight. Then we shall plant white lotuses. Hanabi immediately beamed. I'll help you plant them, Sister Kagaya. Looking at the bright smile on the girl's face, Kagaya's eyes unconsciously grew even softer. Hanabi was still young. She hadn't experienced too much darkness, nor had she been completely warped by war. Her affection and closeness were incredibly direct. If she thought Kagaya was pretty, she said Kagaya was pretty. If she felt Kagaya's house was too desolate, she earnestly helped her pick out warm colors. She didn't think about titles like the progenitor of the Otsutsuki or the mother of chakra. In Hanabi's eyes, Kagaya was simply a beautiful older sister who didn't quite understand how to live life and needed a little help. This feeling was completely foreign to Kagaya. But, she didn't hate it. Sister Kagaya, is it going to be very quiet here from now on? Hanabi suddenly asked. It will. Then, can I come over and play often? Kagaya paused slightly. She looked down at Hanabi. The little girl was looking up at her, eyes sparkling. There was no probing in her tone, no fearful reverence, just a simple, innocent question. Kagaya remained silent for a long time. Then, she gave a gentle nod. You may. Hanabi's eyes curved into happy little crescents. That's great. I'll bring snacks next time. Sister Ino said the commercial district is going to have lots of shops opening soon, flower shops, dessert cafes, tea houses, and places selling clothes. She grew more and more excited as she spoke. When the time comes, we can go shopping together. Shopping. Kagaya heard yet another unfamiliar term. Hanabi explained earnestly, it means going out on the street to look at things you like, buying a few things you want, eating delicious food, and then slowly walking back home. Kagaya tried to picture the scene. Herself and Hanabi, walking down the streets of the holy city. The streets lined with flowers, glowing lamps, and bustling crowds. No fighting. No seals. No enemies. Just looking at things they liked, eating something sweet, and then slowly walking back home. It was so simple. So simple that the past version of herself had never once imagined it. All right, Kagaya said softly. We will go together. Hanabi nodded happily. At that moment, several craftsmen outside had already begun moving furniture inside according to the plans Kagaya had selected. A plush white carpet was rolled out across the center of the hall, and light gold gauze curtains were hung by the windows. As the sunlight filtered through the delicate fabric, the once chilly hall was instantly infused with a soft, comforting warmth. A wooden swing was also assembled by the lakeside. Hanabi was the first to run over and take a seat. Giving a gentle push with her little feet, the swing began to sway back and forth. Sister Kagaya. Look. Kagaya stood under the corridor's eaves, watching Hanabi swing through the morning sunlight. The leaves of the white birch grove rustled in the wind. The surface of the lake shimmered with fragmented light. In the distance, the holy city was still under construction. The low, rumbling sounds of earth-style jutsu drifted over, but they no longer felt oppressive. Instead, they sounded like the steady, pulsing heartbeat of a new world growing into existence. Kagaya suddenly felt that the sound wasn't unpleasant at all. She raised her head and looked toward the 100-meter-tall statue of the six-winged angel god in the distance. Konan's stone visage stood proudly in the morning light, eyes lowered in divine, merciful grace. Further away was the administrative center, the gradually forming streets, and row upon row of houses that would soon be filled with people. This place would become the center of the ninja world. And it would become her new home. Kagaya had once possessed the entire world. Yet, she had never possessed a true home. But now, standing before this unfinished manor, watching the light gold curtains flutter in the wind, watching Hanabi laugh on the swing, and seeing the lake reflect the morning sun, a very faint, very light, yet undeniably real feeling bloomed in her chest. So this was what a home felt like. Sister Kagaya. Hanabi waved at her from the swing. Come try it too. Kagaya watched her for a moment before slowly descending the steps. The hem of her white robes brushed against the grass, her long silver hair swaying gently behind her. She walked over to the swing. Hanabi hopped off, eagerly offering the seat to her. Kagaya sat down. The swing dipped slightly under her weight. Hanabi stood behind her and gave a gentle push with her small hands. The swing began to move. The arc was small, but Kagaya's body swayed forward and slowly drifted back. The wind brushed past her ears. The sunlight fell upon her face. The lake, the birch trees, the holy city, the sky, everything swayed gently in her vision. Kagaya's eyes widened slightly. Behind her, Hanabi laughed and asked, "How is it? Is it fun?" Kagaya didn't answer immediately. A moment later, the corners of her lips twitched ever so slightly. It wasn't a look of aloof indifference, nor was it the cold detachment she showed her enemies. It was a very, very faint smile. "Yes," she said softly. "It is quite nice." Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 302, Chapter 302, Want to know the secret to Hinata's strength? Hanabi held Kagaya's hand, leading her across the expansive central square and making their way straight toward the tallest temporary command building in the holy city. Kagaya's pace remained slow and graceful, but her pure white eyes quietly observed her surroundings. Along the way, whether the ninjas were hauling massive stone blocks or laying down water channels, the moment they saw them, especially upon seeing Kagaya being led by the hand by little Hanabi, they instinctively stopped what they were doing and bowed their heads in deep reverence. This awe was entirely different from the terrifying dread people once felt toward the rabbit goddess. This was absolute submission built upon a brand new order, a profound respect for their superiors and the members of the Akatsuki. Big sister is up there in the main hall. Hanabi pointed at the towering stone steps ahead, her tone brimming with pride. However, when the two stepped onto the top-floor open-air command deck, the scene before them made Kagaya's footsteps pause for a fraction of a second. In the center of the vast hall sat an enormous sand table detailing the layout of the holy city. And standing at the very front of the table, hands resting firmly on the edge as she commanded the entire operation, was Hinata. The Hinata standing there was entirely unrecognizable from the gentle big sister that Hanabi always spoke of. She wore a finely tailored, elegant robe, her long purplish-black hair pinned up high, revealing a pale, slender neck. She wasn't intentionally releasing any chakra, but the terrifying life force and natural pressure belonging to a six-paths-level powerhouse shrouded the entire hall like a bottomless, invisible abyss. The Earth-style foundation for the second engineering team is off by 3 inches on the west side. This will cause the drainage channels to backflow in the later stages. Hinata's voice wasn't loud. It was cool, calm, yet carried the unquestionable, absolute authority of a supreme ruler. A faint blue divine luster swirled deep within her pure white eyes, the physical manifestation of power elevated to its absolute zenith. Orochimaru. Hinata lifted her gaze, letting it fall lightly upon the left side of the hall. The once dreaded, chilling Orochimaru, who had terrified the entire ninja world, was currently dressed in a gray chief engineer's uniform. Hearing his name, he immediately stepped forward, bowing so deeply he didn't even dare look Hinata in the eye. "My deepest apologies, Lady Hinata. The failure in supervision was entirely mine." Orochimaru's voice carried a deeply hidden, instinctual tremble. "Tear it down and rebuild it within the hour." Hinata calmly retracted her gaze and looked to the right. "Lady Tsunade, the medical logistics and drug rations exceeded the budget by 10% yesterday. Although Lord Alex stated that costs are not a concern, the depletion of resources cannot be left as an unaccounted mess. I want to see a detailed itemized list by tonight." The former 5th Hokage, Tsunade, stood among the crowd with her arms crossed. Being singled out by Hinata, the notoriously hot-tempered Konoha princess didn't throw a fit. Instead, her expression turned solemn as she bowed her head to receive the order. "Understood. I will personally review and submit the details this afternoon." Such absolute dominance. Such unshakable composure. At the edge of the hall, Sakura and Tenten, who had rushed over to find their friends during a break, were staring at the scene in dead silence. Both held their breath, their eyes filled with nothing but profound shock, deep envy, and an incredibly complicated mix of emotions. Sakura looked at her master, Tsunade, bowing submissively to Hinata. Then, she looked at her best friend, Ino, who stood a half-step behind Hinata, confidently holding a folder to record the directives. A tangled mess of feelings twisted in Sakura's chest. Even though Ino didn't possess Hinata's terrifying six-paths pressure, she stood tall, her eyes sharp, confident, and radiant. It was the composure that belonged only to the absolute core ruling class of the Holy City, truly standing above all but one. Even the guards maintaining order around the perimeter were entirely made up of elite members from the Hyuga clan. By following Hinata, the Hyuga clan had completely ascended, turning from sparrows into phoenixes. Those main house and branch house members who used to have to tiptoe around Konoha's upper brass could now walk the streets of the Holy City while former Kage from other villages politely greeted them. This was the benefit of joining the Akatsuki. Or rather, this was the privilege of being the women by the god's side. Sakura. Tenten swallowed hard, lowering her voice. An undeniable trace of bitterness and wavering leaked through her tone. Do you think we somehow missed out on something massive? Sakura bit her lower lip, her emerald eyes flashing with a chaotic storm of thoughts. Back in Konoha, she and Ino were rivals. They were best friends on equal footing. Hinata was the timid, introverted girl who always hid behind the crowd and blushed whenever she spoke. But now, they stood at the absolute zenith of power. A single sentence from them could force world-renowned powerhouses to bow their heads. Meanwhile, she and Tenten were stuck as minor squad leaders for the construction teams, ending every day covered in dirt and grime. Joining the Akatsuki. The thought surfaced uncontrollably in Sakura's mind. If I lower my head now, is it still in time? That will be all for today's meeting. You are dismissed. At the sand table, Hinata finally issued the order to adjourn. Yes, my lady. The gathered powerhouses bowed perfectly in unison before retreating respectfully from the hall like a receding tide. It wasn't until all the upper-level management was gone that the suffocating aura of a ruler instantly vanished from Hinata's body. She turned around and saw Kaguya and Hanabi at the door. Her previously cold and stern brows instantly curved into warm crescents, her smile as gentle as a pool of spring water. Hanabi, Lady Kaguya, what brings you two here? You were so cool just now, big sister. Hanabi ran over and threw her arms around Hinata's waist. Hinata's cheeks flushed slightly. She embarrassedly patted her sister's head before looking at Sakura and Tenten, who were standing rigidly nearby. Sakura, Tenten, you're here too. Please, sit down. I'll have someone pour some tea. And no need for the trouble. Sakura waved her hands frantically, stuttering. Even though Hinata had reverted to her usual gentle, approachable self, the scene of her suppressing the entire hall was just far too impactful. Sakura and Tenten felt an instinctual dread, they couldn't dare joke around and roughhouse with Hinata like they used to. Sakura's eyes darted around. She suddenly grabbed Ino, who was just about to put away her documents. Ino, you, come out with me for a second. I have something to ask you. Without waiting for an answer, she dragged a bewildered Ino out of the hall and down a quiet, empty corridor. Tenten quickly scurried after them. Hey. Not so rough. This uniform is really expensive. Ino swatted Sakura's hands away and smoothed out her collar. Though she complained verbally, she couldn't hide the smug, triumphant satisfaction dancing in her eyes at being envied by her friends. Ino. Why is your face so red? Sakura keenly noticed something was off and leaned in suspiciously. Are you hiding something from us? And no, I'm not. Ino reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She jerked backward, her hands flying up to cover her burning cheeks as her eyes darted around nervously. Seeing the relentless, interrogating glares from Sakura and Tenten, Ino knew she couldn't brush this off without an explanation. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her violently pounding heart. The corners of her lips curled into a mysterious, deeply alluring smile. She leaned in close to Sakura's ear and, using a voice so soft only the three of them could hear, whispered a single sentence. Want to know the secret to how Hinata got so strong? Ino's gaze grew incredibly profound, her eyes rippling with the sensual, mature charm of a fully bloomed woman. That is a secret only those who have truly joined the Akatsuki, those who have become one of us are allowed to know. Sakura and Tenten froze in place. Looking at the flush spreading behind Ino's ears and the sultry look in her eyes, even if the two didn't understand the exact mechanics of the act, a woman's intuition made their hearts skip a shameful, frantic beat. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 303, so that's how it is. Looking at the flush behind Ino's ears and the sultry gaze she was giving them, Sakura and Tenten stood frozen in place, their brains short-circuiting for a solid 3 seconds. Then, as if they had just been electrocuted, their faces flushed bright red at a visible speed, the crimson hue spreading all the way down to their necks. They weren't clueless little girls anymore. Combining what Ino had just said about girls' privilege and becoming one of us, along with the fact that there were so many women currently in the Akatsuki. A bold, absurd, yet logically inescapable conclusion exploded in their minds like a clap of thunder. Ino. Are you saying that kind of thing? Sakura's voice cracked in pitch, her emerald eyes bulging in sheer disbelief. Are you saying that Hinata and Lord Alex actually did it? How could doing that turn someone into an existence surpassing a Kage in a single night? Tenten threw her hands over her burning face, her eyes filled with shock and a barely concealed trace of flustered embarrassment. No wonder even someone with Lady May's status willingly moved in. But wait, Ino, didn't you just say you hadn't, then why are you making that face right now? And none of your business. Having her own thoughts laid bare, no matter how bold and outgoing Ino usually was, she was practically smoking from embarrassment now. She forced herself to maintain the dignified air of the holy city's inner circle, coughing lightly and casually flipping her long blonde hair over her shoulder. Anyway, I've said what I needed to say. Lord Alex's power and realm are completely beyond mortal comprehension. It's not called dual cultivation, it is a divine sublimation and blessing of the origin of life from a god. As she said this, an unconcealed flash of yearning and urgency flickered through Ino's beautiful eyes. She looked at the conflicted expressions on Sakura and Tenten's faces, her tone softening as she offered a piece of genuine advice between friends. Sakura. Tenten. The era has truly changed. Back in Konoha, no matter how hard we worked, our absolute limit was becoming elite jonin. We would spend our entire lives suppressed by those great clans and bloodline purists. But here, in the new world built by Lord Alex and Lady Konan, as long as you make the correct choice, even a commoner can witness scenery they never even dared to dream of. Finishing her piece, Ino took a deep breath, turned around, and swiftly walked back into the hall in her heels. If she stayed any longer, she was genuinely afraid her legs would give out from the memories. Only Sakura and Tenten were left staring blankly at each other in the empty corridor. Their hearts were pounding like war drums. The sublimation of the origin of life. Sakura muttered to herself. Her mind flashed back to the magnificent, awe-inspiring sight of Hinata sitting high above, subjugating Orochimaru and Tsunade with a single word. To say she wasn't jealous would be a massive lie. What ninja didn't thirst for power? What woman didn't desire to stand at the absolute pinnacle? Especially when the men granting that power was the current, supreme sovereign of the ninja world, a perfect god in both appearance and presence. Tenten. Sakura bit her lip, her eyes slowly shifting from lost confusion to a burning intensity. Do you think, maybe we should also? Don't ask me. Tenten covered her hot cheeks and quickly cut her off. I don't know anything. I still have to go back and lead the engineering team to fix the water pipes. With that, Tenten fled in a panic. Watching her best friend run away, Sakura leaned back against the corridor wall and let out a long, deep breath. That heart of hers, which had once solely revolved around Sasuke, was now giving birth to an insane, consuming ambition, all because of the man named Alex. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 304, Chapter 304, The Thoughts of the Women. Chapter 304, The Thoughts of the Women. Night fell, and the newly constructed central district of the Holy City was already blazing with lights. On a recently completed commercial street, a newly opened izakaya was bustling with noise. The warm, yellow glow of chakra lamps spilled through the wooden lattice windows onto the bluestone pavement, while the rich scent of sake and the smoky aroma of grilled meat drifted through the air. In a corner booth, the female ninjas of Konoha sat gathered around a round table. Ha! Anko Midarashi boldly tilted her head back, downing her cup of sake in one gulp. She wiped the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand and let out a long breath reeking of alcohol. I'm absolutely exhausted. I've been supervising the digging of the moat for 3 days straight, my bones are about to fall apart. Shizun, sitting beside her, smiled helplessly. She picked up the sake bottle and gently refilled Anko's cup. Drink slower. You still have to oversee the bridge closure project tomorrow. I know. Anko picked up a piece of grilled meat, stuffed it into her mouth, and chewed a couple of times before freezing mid-bite. Her sharp eyes cut through the swirling steam of the grill, locking dead onto Sakura and Tenten, who had been sitting opposite her, completely absent-minded the entire night. Let's get down to business. Anko put down her chopsticks, leaned forward slightly, and lowered her voice. You two used the excuse of delivering blueprints to go to the command center to find Ino and Hinata today, didn't you? So, what did you find out? The moment she said this, the atmosphere in the booth completely shifted. Yugao Yuzuki, who had been quietly holding a cup of green tea, casually set her cup down. Though she was an umbu and an expert at hiding her emotions, her slightly whitened knuckles betrayed the turmoil in her heart. Kurenai Yui, sitting furthest inside, also slowly raised her head. An incredibly complex light flickered within her ruby-red eyes. That girl, Hinata. Kurenai's voice was very soft, carrying a profound sense of disbelief. A few days ago in the central square, she was just standing there. She didn't even weave a single sign. But the natural pressure radiating from her was so immense that I actually felt an illusion that I wasn't even worthy of looking up at her. Kurenai used to be Hinata's Jonin instructor. In her memories, the frail girl who always blushed, stuttered when she spoke, and didn't even dare to look people in the eye felt like just yesterday. Yet that very same timid girl, who couldn't even defeat a genius from the Hyuga branch house, was now standing above tens of thousands of the ninja world's most elite shinobi. Kage level. No. That terrifying, suffocating pressure that smothered even the thought of resistance had long surpassed the pain who had attacked Konoha. It had reached a divine dimension that they simply could not comprehend. It's true. Yugao took a deep breath, her cold voice tinged with awe. Orochimaru and Lady Tsunade were both present at the time. Yet, faced with Lady Hinata's orders, they didn't even dare show a hint of a questioning tone. For her strength to skyrocket to such a level overnight, it completely defies all logic of ninjutsu. Everyone's gaze converged onto Sakura and Tenten's faces once more. Being stared at so intensely gave Tenten the chills. Her naturally thin skin flushed red, and she desperately kicked Sakura under the table for help. Sakura bit her lip. Her emerald eyes flashed with the image of Ino in the corridor, sultry eyes, flushed ears, and that irresistible allure. Ino didn't go into the details, Sakura said, her voice a little dry. Didn't go into details. Anko raised a brow. That gossipy little Ino pig has the loosest lips of anyone I know. When she has something to brag about, you think she could hold it in. It's not that she didn't want to say it, it's... Sakura took a deep breath, throwing caution to the wind as she lowered her voice. Ino said that Hinata didn't train at all. That power was a gift from Lord Alex. She called it, the sublimation of the origin of life. The booth went silent for a second. Sublimation of the origin of life. Shizen blinked. Is that some sort of medical ninjutsu? It doesn't require chakra extraction and directly elevates the life tier. Tenten kept her head buried, staring dead at her teacup as she added in a voice as small as a mosquito's. Ino also said, it's a girl's special privilege. Only by becoming one of them can you. Tenten couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Her face was as red as dripping blood. Shizen still didn't quite grasp it and was about to ask further, but Anko and Kurenai, women with far more worldly experience, instantly froze the moment the words left Tenten's mouth. Clack. The sake cup Anko had just picked up slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table. A few drops splashed onto the back of her hand, but she didn't even notice. It was actually that. Anko's eyes bulged. Even with her usually bold and uninhibited personality, her voice actually hitched. The air around the table seemed to be instantly sucked away. An indescribably sensual, ambiguous tension settled over the female Konoha ninjas like an invisible net. Shizen finally realized what they meant. Her face instantly burned up like a boiled crab as she covered her mouth, stuttering, why you guys mean, Hinata and Lord Alex. How is that possible? No one refuted her. Because everyone was frantically recalling the changes in Hinata over the past few days. Kurenai leaned back against her chair, her eyes unfathomably complex. She suddenly remembered looking at Hinata during a work report at the administrative center 2 days ago. The little girl who used to walk with her head down now wore her long hair elegantly pinned up. The green naivety in her features had faded, replaced by an absolutely breathtaking, mature allure. That hydrated, supple glow to her skin that looked so tender it could drip water. That inadvertent, enchanting laziness that belonged only to a true woman. That was unmistakably the mesmerizing charm of a young wife who had been thoroughly showered in rain and dew, completely shedding her adolescent innocence. It wasn't just Hinata. Cheyenne, Samui, and even the once utterly unapproachable rabbit goddess, Kagaya Otsutsuki, the radiant luster in their eyes over the past few days was practically blinding. No wonder someone as proud as the Mizukage, Mei Terumi, willingly moved into that courtyard in the central district. Because the price was merely a single night of passionate submission. And the reward was the divine power that a mortal could cultivate for several lifetimes and still never touch. The noise of the izakaya carried on, but their table had fallen into a deathly silence. It was as if a massive boulder had been dropped into every woman's heart, kicking up monstrous, surging waves. Who didn't want the power to look down upon the masses? Who didn't want to be protected by a man as perfect as a god? But after a long silence, Yugao Yuzuki suddenly spoke, her cold voice laced with a deep, bone-chilling clarity. She toyed with the empty sake cup in her hand. Do we even have a way back now? Those words were like a bucket of ice water, instantly extinguishing the pink bubbles floating in the air. Everyone's hearts violently clenched. Yugao raised her head, her gaze sweeping across everyone present. Her eyes carried the cruel lucidity unique to an umbu. Don't forget, half a month ago, Lord Alex drained all the chakra from the ninja world. At this, Sakura and Shizen paled. That day, having their power forcefully ripped from their bodies and plummeting from exalted ninjas to helpless, ordinary humans, left them with a crushing weakness that felt worse than death itself. We have chakra in our bodies again right now, but it's only because Lord Alex temporarily lent it to us to build the holy city. Yugao's voice was quiet, but every word pierced their souls. Take a guess. Once this month of construction is over and the holy city is completely finished, will this chakra continue to remain ours, or will it be taken back again, leaving us to live the rest of our lives as ordinary women? Shizen's hand violently trembled. The drunken flush completely vanished from Anko's face. It was easy to grow accustomed to absolute power, but agonizing to have it stripped away. Having tasted the supernatural power of a ninja, who could endure reverting to a weak, defenseless woman waiting to be slaughtered? Especially in this world where a new order had just been established and statuses could be reshuffled at any moment. Gulp. Sakura swallowed hard. Underneath the table, her hands gripped her clothes in a death vice. The image of Hinata sitting on high, deciding the life and death of countless people with a single word, surfaced in her mind once more. Never. I refuse to ever become a weakling hiding behind someone else's back again. Never. A flash of unprecedented resolution and wild ambition flared within Sakura's emerald eyes. Ino said. Sakura suddenly lifted her head, staring at the group with burning eyes. Her voice was low, but it carried the heavy weight of someone ready to bet everything. Ino said that Lord Alex and Lady Konan will be returning in a few days. As soon as she said this, the chilling atmosphere was instantly reignited. And this time, it burned even hotter, even more crazily than before. Kurinai Yuhi picked up her sake cup, using it to hide her slightly trembling red lips. Anko narrowed her eyes, the tip of her tongue gently licking the corner of her mouth. Yugao slowly took her empty cup and placed it upside down on the table. The booth fell back into silence. But beneath that silence, the beast lurking at the bottom of every woman's heart had quietly opened its eyes. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 305, Chapter 305, I Only Belong to Lord Alex. Elsewhere, in a tranquil, highly exclusive courtyard in the holy city's inner ring reserved for high-ranking members. Moonlight pierced through the gaps in the bamboo forest, casting mottled shadows over the bluestone pavement. Ao and Chojuro sat on exquisite rattan chairs, looking somewhat uneasy. On the mahogany tea table in front of them, a Ishin clay teapot was emitting tendrils of white steam, exuding a calming, fragrant aroma. The sliding door was gently pulled open. Mei Terumi walked in, wearing a loose yet incredibly figure-hugging silk kimono, her wooden sandals clacking lightly against the floor. A warm, alluring smile danced in her eyes. The heavy burden of the Mizukage robes was gone, as was the exhausting fatigue from endless paperwork. Right now, her skin was so pale and tender it looked like it could drip water. Her eyes and brows rippled with a deeply nourished, languid charm. It was as if she were aging backward, exuding an astonishing, ripe radiance. Sorry for the wait. Mei naturally took the main seat and reached out to pour tea for the two of them. The holy city is just starting construction. You two have been in charge of redirecting the craftsmen and civilians from the hidden mist over there. You've worked hard, haven't you? Ao lowered his single eye and respectfully accepted the teacup. It is merely my duty. It's just. Lady Mei, we came today to ask about the future arrangements for the mist villagers. After all, it's a mixed bag of people here, with folks from other villages present too. I worry they might be ostracized. Just call me by my name. I'm no longer the Mizukage. Mei took a small sip of her tea, her smile relaxed and confident. Don't worry. As long as I am here, the civilians of the mist won't suffer any grievances. Even though I joined the Akatsuki as a maid to ensure everyone's survival, now that I hold a title as an Akatsuki member, I at least have the power to look after them. She paused, setting her cup down, her gaze deepening slightly. Though, honestly, there's no need for me to go out of my way to protect them. Every bit of planning and resource allocation in the holy city is under the absolute will of Lord Alex and Lady Konan. This place has the fairest, most rational system, monitored relentlessly by enforcement puppets and the surveillance of the Byakugan. Under the watchful eyes of the two lords, no old noble or upper-class official would dare play any two-faced games. As long as they are willing to work, the life they lead here will be 100 times better than in that sunless village of the bloody mist. Hearing these words, the tight tension in Ao's shoulders finally relaxed. Combining what he had observed at the construction sites over the past few days, it was exactly as Mei said. The holy city's laws were as cold as steel but absolutely just. He had even seen smiles on the faces of the commoners that he had never witnessed in the first half of his life. With business concluded, the atmosphere should have relaxed further. But Chojuro, sitting next to Ao, was gripping his trouser leg so hard his knuckles were white. He kept his head down, staring dead at the bamboo shadows on the ground. He held it in for a long time before finally speaking, his voice trembling slightly and laced with heavy suppression. Then, what about you, Lady Mizukage? Mei paused slightly. What about me? Inside the Akatsuki, are you doing well? Chojuro suddenly jerked his head up. His usually timid eyes were entirely bloodshot, his voice carrying a tremor and a profound, unwilling sorrow that even he couldn't hide. You were the high and mighty Mizukage, but you became someone else's maid for the sake of the village. Did that Lord Alex humiliate you? Did he mistreat you? The wind in the courtyard seemed to completely freeze. Ao's heart skipped a beat in terror. He tried to speak up to stop him, but it was already too late. Mei looked at the young man before her, the boy she had personally promoted and treated almost like a younger brother. She froze for a moment, then suddenly burst out laughing. Her laughter was hearty, incredibly feminine, and didn't carry a single trace of forced bitterness. Chojuro, what on earth are you letting your imagination run wild about? Mei laughed until she was practically trembling, her eyes shimmering with alluring light. Mistreat me? Humiliate me? I honestly wish he would mistreat me a few more times. Chojuro was struck as if by lightning, his body stiffening entirely in the rattan chair. I am infinitely grateful for the choice I made back then. Mei reined in her laughter slightly, but the fervor and yearning in her eyes grew even more intense. You simply don't understand what kind of magnificent existence Lord Alex is. The Kage of the old era are nothing more than bugs he could crush with a flick of his wrist. She raised her jade-white arm, admiring her flawless, unblemished skin. By staying there, not only did I ensure the safety of the hidden mist, but I also gained things I wouldn't have dared to even dream of before. Mei's voice trembled slightly with excitement. That six paths power Hinata possesses, which is enough to completely crush the entire ninja world, and this eternal youth that drives countless women to madness. As long as I work hard enough, as long as I can please the Lord, I will have all of that in the future too. She looked at Chojuro, her tone entirely sincere. So, don't ever think I've been wronged. This is the wisest decision I have ever made in my entire life. Every single word was like a poison-laced ice blade, plunging violently into Chojuro's heart and twisting mercilessly. He stared blankly at the radiant Mei Terumi, who was more beautiful now than she had ever been. Suddenly, an image from a few days ago uncontrollably surfaced in his mind. On the day of the relocation in the Hidden Mist Village, Lady Mei had pulled him aside with a red face and secretly asked him for some study materials. Specifically, the kind of adult manga featuring highly shameless, compromising positions. At the time, Chojuro's mind had gone completely blank. When he handed over the manga, he didn't even dare ask a single question. But now, seeing the willing, even eager and fawning smile on Mei's face, Chojuro felt his heart shatter as if it had been crushed by a giant hand. He understood now. All those things in the books, the things that made his face burn and seemed unbelievably shameful, were things Lady Mizukage would likely perform in the dead of night, holding nothing back, eagerly and devotedly trying to win the favor of that man named Alex. Jealousy. Insane jealousy gnawed at his organs like a venomous snake. But accompanying that jealousy was an even deeper, bottomless sense of powerlessness and sorrow. What could he do? He was just a relic of the old era who could barely even hold the Hiramakerii properly anymore. He couldn't give her eternal youth, he couldn't give her six paths level power, and he certainly couldn't give her an era of absolute peace. Before this absolute God, he didn't even have the right to draw his sword. He was only fit to stand below and watch as God played with the unattainable white lotus of his heart. I understand. Chojuro abruptly stood up. His movements were so violent he knocked over the teacup in front of him. Tea splashed across the bluestone pavement. He kept his head buried low, his bangs covering his red, tear-filled eyes. His voice was entirely hoarse, as long as you are happy. There's still work at the construction site. I'll take my leave. With that, he didn't even dare wait for Mei's response. He turned around and stumbled out of the courtyard like he was fleeing for his life. Watching Chojuro's pathetic, retreating figure, a brief, dead silence fell over the courtyard. Ao held his teacup, a complex sigh flashing through his single eye. Lady Mei, what you said just now, it was a bit too cruel for him. Ao shook his head, his voice somewhat dry. Chojuro's feelings for you all this time, you must have been aware of them, right? The smile on Mei's face gradually faded. She picked up the teapot once more and elegantly poured herself another cup. The rising steam blurred the emotions in her eyes. Cruelty is better than letting him drown in hollow fantasies. Mei took a small sip of her tea, her tone regaining the cold decisiveness she once wielded as the Mizukage. That was nothing more than a puppy's infatuation with its former master. The pain of recognizing reality is the only thing that will make him truly grow up and mature. It's time to wake up from the dreams of the old era. She set the teacup down and turned her head slightly, looking out the window toward the towering angel statue and the magnificent shrine beside it. The night breeze ruffled her long hair. The coldness in May's eyes gradually melted into a thick, inescapable pool of spring water, carrying an unshakable, profound devotion. As for me, my body and soul now, and for all the lives to come, belong only to Lord Alex. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 306, Chapter 306, The Humble Bragging Hyuga Clan Head. Over the next few days, the clouds above the ruins of the Land of Rain never closed again. Countless birds and beasts had fled the region far behind, because what was unfolding here was the most frantic, most magnificent miracle in the history of the ninja world. Before the thin morning mist could even dissipate, the entire Earth began to tremble. 3rd Engineering Team. Earth-style squad, rise. Kamita stood atop a towering steel scaffold, a megaphone raised to his mouth. After days of endless shouting, his voice was as hoarse as sandpaper, but his eyes burned with an astonishing brightness. At his command, a full 3,000 Earth-style ninjas from various hidden villages formed hand signs in perfect unison. Rumble. The Earth churned like a living creature. A massive outer foundation wall, stretching for dozens of miles, tore out of the ground in a mere 10 seconds. It was perfectly seamless, without a single millimeter of deviation. Water-style squad. Divert the flow. Immediately after, thousands of water-style ninjas stationed on the opposite side released their power. A torrential surge of water rushed into the pre-excavated channels, transforming into a vast outer moat system encircling the holy city. 100,000 ninjas and over 1 million civilians had merged into a terrifying, precisely calibrated machine across this boundless expanse of land. Every single day, every single moment, the silhouette of the holy city underwent visible, dramatic changes. The central district was completely finished. The shrines and towering spires constructed from pristine white marble gleamed under the morning light, looking exactly like a divine kingdom descended to the mortal realm. Meanwhile, the outer building complexes expanded outward day by day, springing up like bamboo after a rain. Resources from the entire ninja world were continuously funneling here through countless channels. And driving this methodical, relentless progress was the near-insane execution capabilities of the women. In order to forge this city into the exact vision Lord Alex and Lady Konan desired, every single one of them poured their blood, sweat, and soul into the work. The twin pearls of the hidden cloud, Samui and Mabui, practically monopolized the entire logistics operation. Mabui's heavenly transfer jutsu was pushed to its absolute limits, precisely delivering batch after batch of precious stone and timber across thousands of miles. Samui utilized her terrifying organizational skills to perfectly coordinate the food, clothing, and daily necessities of over 1 million people. Cheyenne and Ryuzetsu were establishing complex purification and defense barriers at the city's 4 cardinal points. The spiritual power of the priestess intertwined brilliantly with the glow of the wood of dragon life reincarnation. Anoka led a squad of sealing ninjas, bustling about to carve temperature control and anti-corrosion arrays into the city's drainage systems and underground networks. But the most eye-catching of all was the cold, ethereal figure suspended in midair. Kaguya, draped in her pristine white robes, floated above the massive quarry. Without weaving a single sign, her pure white eyes merely flickered as she raised her jade-like wrist and pressed down gently. Boom. A terrifying gravitational force instantly descended. A solid stone mountain was sliced through by an invisible grid like tofu, instantly transforming into 10,000 perfectly standardized, identical massive stone blocks. The ordinary craftsmen watching from below fell to their knees in absolute awe, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Looking at the perfect stone materials she had personally cut, a very faint, unprecedented sense of satisfaction flashed deep within Kaguya's eyes. To do this for his city, the feeling actually wasn't bad at all. In the outer East District, at the construction site of the 4th Avenue. Hayashi Hyuga walked with his hands clasped behind his back, his feet turned out slightly as he haughtily patrolled the sector managed by his clan. Thanks to Hinata's current absolute, transcendent status of being, above all but one, in the Holy City, the Hyuga clan had truly soared to the heavens. The elite Hyuga shinobi, who used to have to tiptoe around the Uchiha or the Umbu just to run patrols back in Konoha, had now not only taken full control of the Holy City's core security, but had also secured incredibly lucrative positions as supervisors and directors across various major projects. The caged bird seal on the foreheads of every single Hyuga branch member, the brand that once symbolized their eternal subjugation and humiliation, had long since been removed. In its absence, their hearts were filled entirely by a fiery, fiercely proud dedication to their work. Pay close attention. The seams on these stone slabs cannot exceed a single millimeter. This is the path Lord Alex and Lady Konan will walk on. If anyone dares to get sloppy, I will cripple you myself. Hayashi roared, his voice full of vigor. After finishing his lecture, he turned around and just so happened to run straight into a group of old Konoha acquaintances who had just finished surveying the terrain. The former Hokage Tsunade, Orochimaru, Shikaku Nara, Inoichi Yamanaka, Choza Akimichi, and Kurinai Yui. Seeing this group, the corners of Hayashi's stern mouth instantly twitched upward into an uncontrollable, frantic smirk. But he quickly coughed lightly, forcefully suppressing his smile, and put on an "I'm so stressed" expression as he walked over to greet them. "Oh, Shikaku, Lady Tsunade. Are you all out on patrol too?" Hayashi let out a heavy sigh and shook his head. "The project deadlines are really pushing us hard. And that child, Hinata, she takes things far too seriously. Last night, she dragged me along to double-check blueprints until midnight. I told her that since Lord Alex entrusted her with such a heavy burden, she needs to rest more, but she just won't listen." The surrounding air instantly went dead silent for a second. The veins on Tsunade's forehead twitched violently. Fighting the intense urge to smash this old man's smug face straight into the pavement, she gritted her teeth. Hinata cares deeply for the holy city. It is only natural that she is fulfilling her duties. Yes, indeed, Orochimaru chuckled hoarsely, a dark trace of jealousy flashing through his golden snake eyes. Clan head Hayashi has raised an excellent daughter. Yesterday, my foundation was off by 3 inches, and Hinata pointed it out to my face and made me redo it. I am truly ashamed. You're being too harsh on yourself, Lord Orochimaru. Hinata is just very straightforward, I must ask for your continued patience with her." Hayashi spoke politely, but the sheer smugness on his face was practically overflowing. Shikaku rolled his eyes, far too lazy to entertain the old show-off. Beside him, Inoichi Yamanaka nodded along in agreement, but his hand steadily stroked his beard, a hidden delight glinting in his eyes. Your Hyuga clan might be riding high right now, but my daughter Ino has successfully broken into the core circle too. And judging by the subtle hints Ino had secretly passed back a few days ago, she was definitely going to get the ticket to serve the god on that level. Once Ino truly received Lord Alex's divine blessing, the Yamanaka clan would eventually soar to the heavens just like the Hyuga. Thinking of this, Inoichi glanced over at the Yamanaka clansmen who were working themselves to the bone carrying bricks. Then, he looked at Shikamaru slacking off to the side and Choji happily munching on potato chips, and a subtle trace of pity for his old friends welled up in his heart. Following Inoichi's gaze, Shikaku and Choza looked over and saw their own utterly unmotivated sons. "What a drag, how much longer do we have to move these bricks?" Shikamaru complained, dragging his feet lethargically. The veins on Shikaku's forehead throbbed. Damn it. If he had known this was how the dividends of the new era would be distributed, he would have had a daughter no matter what. In a world governed by absolute power, where a god required female confidants by his side, what use was having a son? Having a blessed daughter like Hinata or Ino, who could directly step into the god's line of sight, was the only true path to a clan's everlasting prosperity. Shikaku and Choza exchanged a look, both seeing the deep, bitter regret and exasperation in each other's eyes. Just then, Hayashi suddenly turned his head and called over the Hyuga Grand Elder. "Clan head, what are your orders?" the elder asked respectfully. Hayashi dropped his smile. His gaze turned incredibly sharp as he ordered in a low, heavy voice, "Pass down my command. Pack up all the wealth, ninja tools, and secret medicines the Hyuga clan has accumulated over the past 1,000 years, load them onto carts, and bring them all here. Do not keep a single ryo. Donate it all to the holy city's construction treasury." The moment these words fell, Shikaku, Tsunade, Orochimaru, and the others froze in absolute shock. "Hayashi, are you insane?" Tsunade's eyes widened. "Are you trying to empty out the Hyuga's very foundation? Keep the moldy scrap metal of the old era?" Hayashi snorted coldly. His gaze swept over the group of old aristocrats who were still standing on the fence. His tone carried a bridge-burning dominance, laced with incredibly profound political calculation. "I want Lord Alex and Lady Konan to see that the Hyuga clan doesn't just have Hinata, we have the absolute loyalty to sacrifice everything for this new world. This is called upping the ante. Do you understand?" Watching Hayashi's resolute, retreating back, Shikaku and the others felt a chill run through their hearts. They finally realized that the political landscape of the old ninja world had been completely, irreversibly shattered by this cunning old fox. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 307, Chapter 307, Return. A fierce wind swept past the towering spires. Kamita stood at the very top of a 100-meter steel scaffold, looking down at the world below. Steel frameworks interwoven with pristine white stone. Broad, perfectly flat main avenues radiating outward in concentric rings. Sewage and water supply networks buried deep underground, strictly separated by functional zones. In less than a month, a modernized metropolis born from Alex's verbal descriptions had locked its final puzzle piece into place over the ruins of Amigakure. Kamita wiped the sweat from his forehead and broke into a massive grin. This magnificent miracle was truly enough to be recorded in the annals of history. Within the central core's hub hall, Hinata was leaning over her desk, approving a material allocation form, when the tip of her pen suddenly stopped. A vast, incredibly familiar pressure quietly descended upon the city. It carried absolutely no killing intent, yet it made the six-paths chakra within her body instinctively tremble in submission. She abruptly stood up, knocking her wooden chair to the floor. At that exact same moment, Cheyenne, Ino, Mabui, and the others all simultaneously halted their work. Without prior coordination, the women dashed out of the buildings, speeding straight toward the central statue plaza. Beneath the colossal monument, Alex and Konan materialized out of thin air. Lord Alex. Lady Konan. The women landed and bowed in perfect unison. The moment her eyes met Alex's, the tips of Hinata's ears flushed bright red. Cheyenne bit down hard on her lower lip, her fingers unconsciously twisting the hem of her clothes. The memories of that wild, frenzied night before his departure flooded their minds like a tidal wave. The breathless entanglement, the violent infusion of origin chakra, the absolute, melting euphoria. Just a split second of recollection was enough to make their hearts pound like war drums, their legs grow slightly weak, and a thick, sensual yearning melt into their gazes. Konan ignored the surrounding stares. She tilted her head back and looked up. 100-meter-tall statue of pure white marble stood proudly before her. Its features were cold and pristine, its 6 wings unfurled, sacred and entirely inviolable. It was an exact replica of herself. Alex, is this what you meant, by making me the angel god? Konan turned her head, shock visible in her eyes. Alex nodded, standing with his hands behind his back. Indeed. From now on, you are the absolute faith of these lands. As for me, I'll temporarily take the title of emperor. Whether it's called the Holy Empire or an absolute monarchy, it makes no difference. In the face of absolute martial power, a political system was nothing more than a superficial label. As long as the two of them stood here, they were the sole law of the world. There was no need to overcomplicate things. Kamida arrived, panting heavily, and fell to his knees with a loud thud. Lord Alex. 80% of the facilities are fully operational. Please allow me and the ladies to give you a tour. Alex waved his hand. The group began to move. Walking at the very front, Kamida pointed at the broad avenue beneath their feet, reporting with fanatical zeal, Lord Alex, the main roads were repeatedly compacted by 3,000 Earth-style ninjas using the super lightweight rock jutsu and hardening jutsu. Finally, the surface was glazed using fire style. It is completely indestructible and as smooth as a mirror. Beneath the roads lies the underground sewage and running water network, inscribed with the 4 symbols purification formation by Lady Anoka herself. The water-style squads divert water daily. The water supply for the city's million residents is not only crystal clear, but it automatically purifies and recycles itself. Not a single drop of filth will ever leak out. Following his lead, Hinata pointed toward a ring of towering spires surrounding the central district. Her tone was gentle, yet filled with pride. Lord Alex, those are the sensory monitoring towers built by the Hyuga clan in cooperation with the Yamanaka clan. The structures are inlaid with premium chakra-conductive metal, connecting to a massive underground sensory water sphere network. By combining the Hyuga elite's Byakugan with Ino's long-range mental network, any chakra fluctuation in the holy city, even the flight path of a single bird, is under the absolute control of the core hall. And the civilian and commercial districts. Cheyenne eagerly stepped forward to claim credit, pointing at the neatly arranged, magnificent building complexes in the outer ring. All high-rise residential buildings were seamlessly molded using Earth style, they are completely earthquake and fireproof. Samui and the lightning-style squads have constructed a giant energy-storing lightning pool in the north of the city. Transmitted through underground arrays, every household can now turn on lightning glow lamps at night without needing an open flame. The temperature of the entire holy city is regulated by a geothermal hub and wind-style arrays. No matter how freezing or scorching the outside world is, it will always be spring within the city. Finally, Ryuzetsu pointed at the faint, transparent barrier shimmering above the city and added, the outer perimeter is protected by the sealing barrier we constructed. By fusing the priestess's spiritual power with Uzumaki sealing jutsu, it can easily withstand continuous bombardment on the level of tailed beast bombs, while automatically filtering out toxic miasma and impurities from the outside air. Transportation, water management, surveillance, energy, defense. Miraculous facilities that the old ninja villages wouldn't have even dared to dream of were now perfectly integrated into the holy city of this new era. This wasn't just a city, it was a supermassive, god-forged machine driven entirely by chakra and jutsu. Walking through the streets, the broad, luminous, modern layout vastly outclassed the cramped, gloomy ninja villages of the old era. Alex's gaze swept over the pristine streets and the magnificent shrines, and he gave a slight nod. Well done. Hearing those 2 words of approval, Kamida's shoulders violently shook as tears of intense emotion streamed down his old face. Hinata and the other women's eyes sparkled. The accumulated exhaustion of the past weeks was instantly swept away, replaced entirely by ultimate satisfaction and pride. All of their relentless effort had been solely to earn the single word of validation from him. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 308, Chapter 308, Founding of the Empire. 7 days later. The morning sun pierced through the sea of clouds, pouring golden light over the marble-paved main avenues of the holy city, reflecting a brilliant, glass-like luster. This was no longer the dilapidated, perpetually reigning Amigakure. Kamida stood at the edge of the 100-meter-high altar, looking down. The plaza below was densely packed. A million civilians had converged into a massive, dark ocean of humanity. The time they had spent living in the holy city was more than enough to erase whatever cheap nostalgia they still held for their old nations. Here, every meal included white rice and meat. The houses were perfectly, constantly warm. At night, there were no stray kunai flying out of the dark to slit their throats. To the commoners, it didn't matter who ruled the world. What mattered was who allowed them to live like actual human beings. The muddy swamp of the old era has finally been paved over, Kamida muttered to himself, his fingers trembling violently with excitement. The sound of ceremonial cannons erupted from the four corners of the city, specialized lightning-style jutsu fired high into the sky, blooming into long-lasting patterns of the Akatsuki cloud. However, in one corner of the viewing platform, the atmosphere was oppressive and heavy. Tsunade gripped the stone railing so tightly her knuckles were white. Looking down at the massive flag symbolizing absolute unification, a tangled mess of emotions churned in her chest. As the granddaughter of the first Hokage, she had fought half her life to protect Konoha. But right now, watching those once displaced refugees from the land of fire cheering with pure joy below, the will of fire, she had stubbornly guarded for decades was shaken by an almost absurd realization. So the so-called stability isn't achieved through the political games of the Kage, but through absolute suppression. Tsunade closed her eyes. The smiling faces of Nawaki and Dan surfaced in her mind. If this kind of power had existed back then, would they still have had to die? Orochimaru stood beside her, his golden snake eyes brimming with fanatical zeal and sharp mockery. Tsunade, are you still reminiscing about that pile of ruins? Look at this place. Chakra is no longer a tool for murder, it has been tamed into the very pulse of this city. This is the ultimate form of evolution. That lord, he has walked far ahead of everyone else. Not far away, Kurenai Yuhi and Anko stood side by side. Anko chewed on a skewer of dango, but her eyes couldn't look away from the breathtakingly beautiful figures standing high above on the altar. Hinata wore a moon-white ceremonial robe, Ino was dressed in a gold-patterned gown, and even Mei Terumi had changed into a deep purple robe signifying her status among the Empire's highest echelon. Anoka, Cheyenne, Kagaya Otsutsuki, Samui, Ryuzetsu, all of them stood there, utterly radiant and dazzling. They looked like the very center of the world. They stood at the absolute pinnacle of power, their eyes carrying the tranquil confidence of women who had been thoroughly pampered by a god. I used to think becoming a jonin was the absolute limit. Anko swallowed her dango, her voice a little dry. Only now do I realize that in his lordship's eyes, the entire ninja world is nothing more than a little bonsai tree. Kurenai, do you think we still have a chance to squeeze our way into that bonsai tree? Kurenai remained silent, her red lips pressed tightly together. Hidden deep within her eyes was a trace of inferiority, overwhelmed by a far deeper, intense yearning. Clang. The tolling of a massive bell echoed through the clouds. The raucous venue of a million people instantly fell into a deathly silence. An indescribable pressure descended from the sky, a tear of life that utterly surpassed conventional ninja comprehension. The empire is established. The deity descends. Kamida's shrill, fanatical roar ripped through the amplification arrays. A massive rift tore open the sky. Konan was the first to emerge. The 6 massive paper wings behind her unfurled completely, every single feather flowing with a pure, milky white sacred radiance. She hovered directly in front of the angel statue, her face cold and noble. As her eyes looked down upon the earth, she truly looked like a savior descending from the high heavens. I am the angel god. I bestow absolute rule upon this world. Konan's tone was calm, but it pierced every ear like rolling thunder. With a wave of her hand, the barrier canopy above the holy city instantly flared to life. The dazzling, miraculous phenomena in the sky caused the million civilians below to drop to their knees, kowtowing madly. In the eyes of mortals, this was a true god. Immediately after, Alex slowly stepped out from the void. He didn't display any flashy jutsu. Merely by standing there, the entire fabric of reality seemed to collapse around him, making him the absolute center of existence. Dressed in dark imperial robes trimmed with dark gold, his abyssal gaze swept across the masses. Wherever he looked, all living things bowed in submission. In that moment, Hayashi Hyuga was the very first to drop to his knees, smashing his forehead heavily against the stone pavement. Your subject, Hayashi Hyuga, greets his imperial majesty. Long live the Emperor. Behind him, the elite Hyuga guards fell to their knees in perfect, unified precision. The clattering of their armor struck straight into the soul. This fervor spread like a plague. Shikaku let out a long sigh and slowly bent his knees. He was followed by Choza, Inoichi. The proud backbones of the former Konoha ultimately chose to lower their heads before the absolute tide of the new era. We greet your majesty. The roar of a million voices merged into a tsunami, violently shattering the clouds above. Alex walked to the supreme throne and turned to sit down. In this exact moment, the ninja world's thousand-year-old feudal lord system, along with the fractured era of hidden villages, was completely and utterly nailed into its coffin. Hinata stood faithfully by Alex's side. Feeling the crushing, world-dominating majesty radiating from him, her legs subconsciously pressed tightly together. The thick adoration in her eyes was so dense it could not be melted away. In her heart, there was nothing left but absolute, devoted submission. The ceremony neared its end. The setting sun dyed the holy city in a blanket of blood-red gold. Alex leaned back against the throne, his fingers unconsciously tracing the true dragon carvings on the armrest. Konan folded her wings and stood quietly beside him. As their eyes met, both saw the profound triumph and satisfaction in each other's gaze. This empire, this city, the life and death of billions, it all rested in the palms of their hands. Alex, Konan whispered softly, so only the two of them could hear. Konan. The corners of Alex's lips curled upward as he looked out toward the accelerating construction of the outer city silhouette. This is the peaceful, stable world we built. The goal we set back then, right now, it is realized. The two shared a smile, each perfectly reflected in the clear depths of the other's eyes. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters. Chapter 309, Resurrecting Yahiko and Nagato. The glow of the setting sun had yet to completely fade from the white jade steps. Alex leaned against his dark gold throne. His fingers stopped tapping the armrest as he turned his head to look at Konan beside him. Their eyes met. No words were needed, a perfect understanding had already flowed between them. Begin, Alex said evenly. Konan gave a slight nod. She took a step forward. The 6 expansive paper wings behind her gently folded inward, the sacred white light withdrawing into her body. At the center of her forehead, her skin parted silently. The crimson Rinne Sharingan snapped open, its 9 tomo spinning slowly. She raised her right hand and spread her fingers slightly. Ryup. The void ahead tore open like a sheet of fragile paper, violently ripped apart by an invisible force. A deep, dark rift spanning dozens of feet hung suspended in midair. An icy, ancient, decaying aura instantly poured out of it, causing the surrounding temperature to plummet. The pure land had long since been entirely extracted by her and merged into the core space of her Amanamanaka. Right now, she was the sole, absolute master over the boundary of life and death. Down in the viewing platform, the upper brass of the old era, who had only just calmed their pounding hearts, froze rigidly once more. Orochimaru violently stepped forward, half his body leaning over the railing as his golden snake eyes locked dead onto the rift in the sky. His breathing grew heavy, his chest heaving violently. This is, truly crossing the boundary of life and death. His hoarse voice leaked a sickly, fanatical zeal. No sacrifices. No Edo Tensei. She is pulling them out of thin air. Tsunade's face was completely drained of blood. Her hands hung limply at her sides. Resurrecting the dead. In the ninja world, those words represented an absolute taboo and a horrific price. Whether it was Elder Chiyo's one's own life reincarnation or the Rinnegan's Rinne Tensei, every single method required the caster to pay with their own life. But now, Konan was simply raising her hand with casual ease. Under the awestruck gaze of a million people, 2 clusters of softly glowing souls were forcefully dragged out from the depths of the rift, suspended high in the sky. Konan's gaze softened. Her red lips parted slightly. Reconstruct. The world-creating, miraculous power of the Kekai Mora erupted. Yang release represented life, Yin release represented form. A boundless surge of life force crashed down like a reversed waterfall, tightly wrapping around the 2 souls. White bones materialized out of thin air. Meridians and veins frantically knit together and spread like tree roots, as bright red blood surged through the newly formed vessels. In just a few short breaths, flesh grew full, and muscle fibers knit together perfectly. Even the black cloaks with red clouds, the symbol of their past, were perfectly replicated through the interlacing of chakra. There was no lightning. There was no thunder. There was only a suffocating, dead silence. The blinding light faded. Supported by an invisible force, 2 bodies, possessing warm, beating hearts and steady breaths, slowly descended. Their feet landed firmly on the white jade steps just below the throne. It was the orange-haired youth, Yahiko, and the red-haired youth, Nagato. The plaza below was utterly silent. Every single ninja who recognized the identities of these two men felt their scalps go numb and a deep chill run down their spines. Especially Tsunade and Orochimaru. They had personally witnessed the complete and utter collapse of the old rules of reality. In this new empire, death was no longer the end. It was merely a setting that God could edit with a single thought. Who would dare rebel now? The price of treason would be the eternal enslavement of their very souls across countless lifetimes. A gentle breeze swept across the high platform. The abyssal rift in the void slowly sealed shut, and the residual light on the white jade steps gradually faded. Yahiko and Nagato stood shoulder to shoulder, their chests heaving violently. In the exact instant they were resurrected, Konan hadn't just rebuilt their flesh, she had directly injected a massive surge of mental energy straight into their minds. It contained the turbulent history of the ninja world over the past 2 decades, the rise and fall of the Akatsuki, and finally, the memories of Alex's arrival. It showed how he and Konan had swept across the 5 great nations with crushing, unstoppable momentum, ultimately putting an end to the chaotic era. The long span of memories flashed rapidly through their consciousness, feeling as though they had lived through a long dream crossing life and death in a fraction of a second. When the final memory locked into place, the holy city rising from the ground and a million people kneeling to welcome their god, Yahiko and Nagato opened their eyes simultaneously. So that's how it is. Yahiko was the first to speak. His voice was still clear and bright, but it carried an indescribable, profound shock. He turned his head and looked at Konan first. In the last moment of his memory, Konan was still the young girl bandaging his wounds in the freezing rain. But now, she was the angel god standing high above all living things. Then, Yahiko's gaze fell upon Alex. His eyes were complicated. There was awe, curiosity, and above all, a deeply relieved sense of gratification. As an idealist who died in the darkest hour just before the dawn, all Yahiko had pursued in his life was to stop the land of rain from crying. But now, through Konan's memories, he saw it wasn't just the land of rain. The cries of the entire ninja world had been silenced. Alex, an empire. This kind of scale. I didn't even dare to dream this big back then. Yahiko broke into a wide grin. It was a bit goofy, yet carried the exact same uninhibited, free-spirited nature he always had. Even though the methods were a bit brutal. Konan, Lord Alex, thank you. There truly is no more war on this land. This air without the stench of gunpowder, it smells so sweet. Compared to Yahiko's pure joy, Nagato's reaction was much heavier. He stood rooted to the spot, the eyes beneath his red bangs carrying a hard-to-hide trace of melancholy. He was digesting the memories regarding Naruto. He remembered betting everything on that orange-haired, resolute-eyed boy right before he died. He had truly believed Naruto was the child of prophecy who would bring peace through mutual understanding. But now, reality had given him a cold, yet utterly perfect answer. Peace had indeed arrived. But it didn't come from Naruto's preaching. It came from the absolute, overwhelming martial power and ironclad order of the men sitting on the throne. Naruto, the child of prophecy. Nagato muttered softly, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I entrusted my dream to him, hoping he would find the answer I couldn't. I never expected that the final answer would look like this, achieved by Konan and this man. Nagato looked at Alex. As someone who once possessed the Rinnegan and called himself a god, he understood better than anyone exactly what the aura radiating from Alex meant. That wasn't the level of a ninja. That was the crushing pressure of the true origin of chakra. But, this is fine too. Nagato closed his eyes and opened them again. The gloomy shadows in his gaze slowly dissipated, replaced by an unprecedented clarity. The dream I inherited from Yahiko, the peace I pursued for half my life, at this very moment, it has truly been realized. Even if this peace no longer requires mutual understanding as a prerequisite, as long as it ensures no one else has to suffer the heartbreak I did, then this is the best possible outcome. The two friends exchanged a look before turning to face Konan. Konan was currently standing quietly beside Alex, her hand resting naturally on the back of his. Yahiko and Nagato were far too familiar with that posture. It was the absolute manifestation of surrendering one's total trust and soul. Konan, Yahiko scratched his head, looking a little out of place as he broke the solemn atmosphere. Even though we got all the memories, we've been asleep for way too long. With all these massive skyscrapers outside, and all those new rules you established, we're probably going to need some time to learn how to be human again before we can adapt. Nagato nodded in agreement, his voice steady. We need a little time to observe this new world. I think the three of us should find a time to talk in private later. He gave Alex a pointed look. His tone carried the necessary respect for the Emperor of the Empire, while still maintaining the blunt honesty of a close, old friend. Alex leaned back in his throne, his expression calm and unbothered. You are Konan's close friends and companions, Alex said with a slight smile. The holy city is vast. Take the next few days to wander around as you please. Hinata, issue them 2 highest clearance access passes. Yes, Your Majesty. Hinata stepped forward, respectfully presenting 2 access cards glowing with chakra. Konan looked at the 2 companions she had regained, her eyes filled with gentle warmth. I will host a welcome banquet for you tonight. For now, let Kamita show you to your quarters. Yahiko cheerfully snatched the access cards. He waved at Alex and Konan, then turned to look at the magnificent holy city sprawling below them, his eyes gleaming with eager excitement. Let's go, Nagato. Let's go see the Amigakure where it doesn't rain anymore. No, let's go see the holy city. Led by Kamita, the 2 slowly walked down the white jade steps, blending seamlessly into the brightly lit, bustling world of the living. On the viewing platform, Tsunade watched their retreating figures, her eyes churning with a storm of emotions. If people who have been dead for over a decade can be perfectly resurrected, then Nawaki. Support this fanfic by leaving positive review, comments, and power stones. For advanced chapters.